Chapter 130. Du Chifeng was one of the few Hong Kong film directors that Eric liked. White Pigeon Wu had developed his own set of violent aesthetics because of the success of Hero itself, while Du Chifeng had developed his own mature and distinctive personal style after dozens of films. His films had a dark philosophy that combined elements such as coldness, violence, fatalism, and sadness. Dark War was one of the few films in Du Chifeng's works that had a sense of carefreeness amidst the sadness. If one were to evaluate this movie from the perspective of an ordinary audience, the word that would appear the most would be one word: cool. That was the main reason why Eric chose this film. At the same time, it was also a bold attempt by Eric. He wanted to see if such a film that didn't exist in Hollywood history would be successful. In his memory, many of the blockbuster Hollywood films in the next 10 years had already been copyrighted. It was very difficult for Eric to snatch food from the tiger's mouths, especially after others knew that he was optimistic about a film. There weren't many blockbuster movies that didn't have copyrights. At the current pace, it might be finished in 2 or 3 years. Of course, this was also a very safe attempt. First of all, the story of Dark War was very exciting, and it was approved by the two big names, Cruise and Hanks, which meant that the story didn't have a difference in taste between the East and the West. Secondly, the two male leads that Eric used were now very guaranteed at the box office. Tom Cruise had just experienced the success of Rain Man, and his popularity had once again reached a small peak. Tom Hanks had just been nominated for an Oscar for Best Actor with last year's Flying Across the Future. Coupled with the box office appeal accumulated by Eric's own previous films, and the cool script, according to the analysis of Columbia's data department, it was very easy for this film to win $100 million in the summer. On April 5th, in a large studio of Columbia Pictures, Dark War officially started shooting. The first thing to shoot was a series of indoor scenes. This time, Eric didn't plan to shoot in chronological order like Wind and Moon. The images of the two protagonists in Dark War were very distinct. There was no change from the beginning to the end. One was smart and capable, while the other was evil and wise. As long as they could get into character smoothly, no matter which scene they started from, there wouldn't be too much of a problem. Therefore, Eric decided to go from simple to complicated, from the inside to the outside of the shooting process. In the ward after Andy, played by Cruise, learned that his condition had worsened, he still got up from the bed and slowly put on his clothes. How much longer? For weeks. If you have internal bleeding, you can die at any time. The spirited doctor sat behind the desk and replied with a hoarse voice. Andy didn't stop putting on his clothes despite hearing the bad news. After putting on his belt, he handed a dozen bills to the doctor. "Don't worry, just give me 4 weeks' worth of painkillers." After taking the painkillers, Andy put on his coat and prepared to leave. The doctor sighed and said, "I don't think we'll meet again." "In this lifetime," Andy replied calmly. Cut. After the scene was finished, Eric called for a pause. He didn't say good or no good. Sitting behind the monitor, he frowned slightly as if he was thinking about something. Although Eric had been discharged from the hospital, his head was still wrapped in bandages. Occasionally, he would have headaches. However, after repeated examinations, no problems were found, so Eric was no longer nervous. There was nothing special about this part of Cruise's performance. With his acting skills, he could easily complete it. In the post-production, this part of the scene would be combined with the scene of Andy on the rooftop. They would use a montage technique to mix and edit it. Moreover, they would also use fast and slow shots. In just 2 short scenes, there would be 2 fast and slow shots. The reason why this was done, and the tense dubbing with the ticking of the second hand, was to give the audience a subtle hint of the passing of time. Andy only had 4 weeks left to live, and after a few short scenes, it would arouse the nervousness and curiosity of the audience. What would he do in the remaining 4 weeks? The staff present were all old crew members who had worked with Eric several times, so they had seen Eric fall into deep thought more than once during the shooting process. Therefore, they tacitly agreed not to disturb him. They quietly arranged the equipment and patiently waited for Eric to come back to his senses. However, after waiting for a minute, Cruise finally became impatient. He felt that there was nothing wrong with his performance just now. If it worked, he would pass. If it didn't work, Cruz didn't mind repeating it a few more times. What was going on now? Hey Eric, how was the scene just now? Do you want to do it again? Cruz finally couldn't help but walk up to Eric and gently nudge him. Eric suddenly felt a figure appear beside him. Because they were in the studio, all the lights were artificial. When Cruz appeared beside Eric, he just happened to block a light behind Eric, forming a faint shadow in front of him. A shadow. Eric suddenly looked up and saw Cruz's expression. He explained, "Sorry, Tom. I was thinking about something and got distracted." "It's okay." Cruz showed a generous smile. "How was the scene just now? Do you want to do it again?" "I'm afraid we have to do it again," Eric replied. "Can you wait a moment?" Cruz shrugged and stepped back. He watched as Eric called over the lighting technician. Then the lights in the studio began to be dimmed slowly. It was no longer the scene that simulated sunlight. Eric stared at the monitor and waited until the lights were adjusted to his satisfaction. Then he asked the lighting technician to stop. "Okay, everyone get ready. We'll do the scene just now again," Eric ordered loudly. After a while, the set keeper walked up and put down the board. The shooting started again. Eric stared at the scene of Andy and the doctor on the monitor seriously. He secretly compared this scene with the scene on the rooftop in his mind. This scene was used to illustrate Andy's current situation in the movie. It was very similar to Andy's memories on the rooftop. After watching this scene, the audience might even have the misconception that Andy wanted to jump off the building. They might even think that this was a flashback movie where Andy used 4 weeks to complete all his wishes. Then, with nothing left to live for, he climbed onto the rooftop of the building and jumped off in one fell swoop. Since it was used to explain and recall memories, Eric felt that the lighting in the original version was too bright. It was exactly the same as Andy's scene on the sunny rooftop. It didn't give the audience any sense of difference. Therefore, the effect of the expression was much worse. Eric didn't want to complain. The use of lighting in To Fing's movie was just like White Dove Wu's 3 axes. Except for the common high contrast and the stage, there weren't many tricks. In this respect, Wang Jiawei had a strong personal style, but the use of lighting and color was at a master level. Of course, Wang Jiawei's movie was an indie film. Their movies couldn't be compared at all. After solving the problem of lighting, Eric began to focus on Cruz's performance. This small scene really didn't have anything to show off. Eric didn't want to nitpick. If Cruz's performance could bring unexpected surprises, he would be very happy. If not, he wouldn't be disappointed. As long as it met his personal standards, it would be fine. Anyway, the opportunity had been given to Cruz. Whether he could rely on this movie to get a nomination, or even win some acting awards, still depended on Cruz's own efforts. Eric was more concerned about the box office of this movie. As for the Oscar prospects that he described to persuade Cruz to agree to the cross-dressing scene, didn't all the directors and producers say the same thing when they persuade actors to join the cast? Eric didn't feel guilty at all. He was more concerned about the box office of the movie. After all, he was still young and didn't have a strong desire for Oscar awards. Focusing on making money was the right thing to do. The theme of Dark War was definitely novel, but whether it could win the favor of the Oscar judges, only God knew. In Feng Yu's previous life, Andy had won the first Hong Kong Film Award. If he thought about it carefully, it might have been because of public relations. In addition, the Hong Kong film industry had declined in all aspects in 1999. There weren't many outstanding films. That was why Andy was able to realize his long-cherished wish of being crowned the Best Film Award. After only 2 or 3 NGs, the scene was passed. The crew began to move to another room in the studio. This process took more than half an hour. A movie didn't really spend a lot of time on shooting scenes. Most of the time was spent on setting up the scenes. Most of the scenes in these 2 days were Cruz's one-man show. He would be in his own room, examining Hank's character, Sean, making the cross-dressing scene, vomiting blood when drinking, and disguising himself as Andy's father Peter to confront the villain. Although he had the original movie in his mind, Eric still designed some scenes so that there would be enough material for post-production. After all, this was a brand new Hollywood movie. Eric couldn't make it exactly the same as the one in his memory. According to the shooting plan, The process would last for 3 days. After the 4th day, there would be a group scene with Hanks and the others. After that, there would be an indoor scene between Cruise and Hanks. Eric was looking forward to that moment. In his previous life, the two superstars didn't interact at all on the silver screen. It was a pity, because there was plenty of time to shoot this movie. The crew wrapped up after 8 hours. After instructing the assistant director to send the finished scenes to the editing room, Eric left in a hurry. Apart from the movie, he had more things to do than anyone else. The post-production of Dark War also had to wait until the movie was completely wrapped up. The initial casting for Island Horror and Smelling a Woman had been completed. He still had to finalize the cast. Moreover, he had to pay attention to Steel Magnolias, which was far away in Louisiana from time to time. Filming for Steel Magnolias had already started a month ago, but even with Herbert Ross, an old Hollywood film director, he had only completed less than half of the filming. It would take at least another month for the film to be wrapped up, and the post-production would take at least another month. What's more, this movie might even have a risk of over-budget. Eric was happy to see this. Steel Magnolias wasn't Firefly's sole investment. Previously, Herbert Ross had pulled in $3 million alone. Therefore, Eric didn't mind investing another 1 or 2 million yuan in the movie to increase Firefly's share. Eric was now waiting for Herbert Ross to ask for money. "Hey Eric, how's the wound on your head?" When Eric returned to Firefly's office, he saw Jonathan Dime, who had been waiting there for a long time. Jonathan's face was obviously tired, but his voice was still full of energy. "Thank you, Jonathan. I'm much better now. Did you bring the information?" "Here, I screened out dozens of candidates according to your request. I'm exhausted," Jonathan said with a smile. He was indeed the most tired person these days. It was all because of Island Horror. Because there were 2 young actors in the script, and because of Stuart Runkle's stimulation, Firefly had received more than 5,000 files of young actors. Many of the children who sent the files had no acting experience at all. Many parents wanted to become rich overnight like Runkle's family, so they sent the files of their children. Some unscrupulous parents deliberately made up lies that their children had made cameo appearances in certain movies or TV series. The staff had to spend a lot of time confirming the authenticity of these files. In this case, it was easy to imagine how difficult it was to screen out potential young actors. Eric had thought of relying on the memory in his mind to directly ask people to find the children with potential. However, the difficulty of such a task was probably even greater than selecting a small actor with potential from 5,000 people. Although Eric's mind had completely replicated the memory of his previous life, there was still a lot of information that he did not know before. If he randomly mentioned the name of a famous Hollywood star in his previous life, the staff might be able to find hundreds of children with the same name in this country. Westerners were known for their lack of creativity when it came to naming. He took a stack of thick files from Jonathan Dime. Not only did it contain the names of the 2 children in Island Horror, there were also the names of the 3 servants, the real-life Victor's family, Grace's husband, and other actors. Although Eric had let Jonathan decide on a few of the less important supporting roles, he still wanted to look through them personally. The first thing Eric checked was the information of 2 of the more important young actors. Eric glanced at the list of 10 young boys, and was surprised to see Macaulay Culkin's name. He did not know the names of the other 9 boys. He flipped to Culkin's information. Although he did not have Home Alone, the boy still had the experience of acting in 2 movies. That explained why he was on the list. Jonathan took out Culkin's information and glanced at it curiously. "Eric, do you like this boy?" Eric shook his head. "No, this one has been eliminated." I think this boy named Macaulay Culkin is the most intelligent one among the 10. Eric could not tell Jonathan that he did not want Macaulay Culkin to be as famous as he was in his previous life. Although Island Horror could not bring about the same amount of fame as Home Alone, the impact it would have would not be too small. The best choice was to let Macaulay Culkin act in 1 or 2 mediocre movies from time to time. When the boy grew up, he would be able to choose his own path in the future. If he made the boy famous now, his weird parents would definitely ruin the poor boy for money, just like they did in his previous life. "Jonathan, did you forget that the boy in Island Horror Nicholas had a rather dull personality. Looking at the boy's big eyes in the picture, I think he is too smart. That's why I can't do it. Jonathan followed Eric's train of thought and found that it was indeed the case. All right, I did overlook that. Eric continued to flip through the information of the remaining 9 boys. Suddenly, he raised his head and stared at Jonathan Dimey, who was sitting opposite him. He asked, Jonathan, do you know any of these children? Jonathan Dimey's eyes darted around a few times, and his face turned slightly red. In the end, he nodded, got up, and pulled out the boy's information. This Brian Baker is the youngest son of an actor friend of mine who I used to work with. I'm sorry, Eric, I shouldn't have done this. But I swear, I did a serious interview for this kid, and confirmed that he was qualified before I added him. Jonathan was about to crumple the boy's information into a ball and throw it into the bin when he was stopped by Eric. Eric took the boy's information and looked at it carefully. Then he nodded with satisfaction. Jonathan, let's do it. Well, I'm really sorry. Eric, what did you say? Jonathan came back to his senses and looked at Eric in disbelief. Eric smiled and said, I said let's do it. You know, I don't have time to do an interview now. Also, I believe that you won't joke about this movie, right? Of course. Jonathan nodded affirmatively. This movie was related to his future in Hollywood. Whether or not he could make the leap depended on it. Then is there anyone else? Eric asked again. This time, Jonathan shook his head firmly. Absolutely not, Eric. The rest of the candidates have nothing to do with me. Eric had done Jonathan a small favor on the spur of the moment. Although he had already given him a big opportunity because of island horror, Eric did not mind giving him a little more without giving anything in return. Jonathan Dimey was a very good stock with potential. Eric had already decided to rope him in. In addition to the future, The Silence of the Lambs, Hank's first Oscar-winning film Philadelphia Story, was directed by him. Since the boy had been confirmed, there was no need to look at the rest. He directly opened the file containing the little girl's candidate. It seemed that the saying that Hollywood was actually very small was true. This time, there were actually 2 actresses that he knew, Kirsten Dunst and Sarah Michelle Gellar. Chapter 131. In the photo, Kirsten, who was just 7 years old, was as delicate as a doll. She had blonde hair and a round face. She was wearing a princess dress and a lovely lace sun hat. She also had beautiful blonde bangs on her forehead. It was a pity that Eric knew that this actress would become more and more ugly as she grew up. When she reached adulthood, she would not be as delicate as she was now. Perhaps in the eyes of Westerners, she would not be considered ugly. However, with his Asian aesthetic standards, he could not see anything beautiful about her. If he really had to praise her, he could only say that she had a temperament. It did not seem like he was praising a woman. As for this Lolita who only had a shelf life of 12 years old, Eric chose to pass. This girl did not have much potential. If she was not lucky enough to become Spider-Woman, perhaps this child star would be forgotten after 2,000 years. In the parallel universe, after the end of the Spider-Man trilogy, Kirsten Dunst's career took a nosedive, and she almost disappeared from the public eye. He selected another familiar girl, Sarah Michelle Gellar. Compared to Sarah in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, this girl had a round face. Although she was almost 12 years old, she still looked very petite. It was not a problem for her to act as a 10-year-old girl. This was probably the reason why Sarah was selected. Compared to Kirsten, who had only acted in New York Story, Sarah had a series of movie names on her resume. Of course, they were not famous. At least, even with Eric's huge viewership, he had not seen any of them. Jonathan, what's your impression of this girl? Eric handed Sarah's information to Jonathan Dimey. Jonathan took it and glanced at it. He quickly recalled the scene of Sarah's interview. This child has been acting in movies since she was 4 years old. The acting experience written in her profile is all real. During the interview, the girl had a strong sense of camera. She was natural and unrestrained, and did not have stage fright at all. I talked to her for a while. She is very smart and sensible. Although the girl looks small and skinny, she is already 12 years old. Moreover, she is a little precocious. Her mentality is at least 14 years old. If we use her, compared to those real 10-year-old children. It will be much easier during the filming. Eric took back the information and decided, then she'll be the one. Communicate with her as usual. She has to sign into UTA. Although Eric had told Kapoor that he didn't plan to expand UTA in the next few years, he definitely couldn't let other agencies take advantage of the actors groomed by his film projects. Because of Eric's CAA Revelations article, many agencies began to make drastic changes to their original agency system. Although they couldn't completely imitate CAA's model, CAA's business model was completely exposed by Eric. At the very least, CAA could no longer maintain its superiority in terms of business model. In the future, there would definitely be a situation where the top agencies would rise. Therefore, UTA could calmly and steadily develop without worrying about CAA dominating the market. Eric continued to flip through the other actors' information. It seemed like he had only glanced at it a few times before deciding on the actors in a hurry. Jonathan Demme was not used to it. Eric, don't you need to arrange another round of auditions? Aren't you being a little? You think I'm being too hasty? Eric looked up with a smile. Jonathan scratched his head. Shouldn't you at least watch their audition tapes? Eric circled the most important actor list with a pen. No need, Jonathan. I believe that these people have been carefully selected by you. Any one of them is definitely qualified for the role they need, so I don't need to do this at all. Besides, I really don't have much time. Shock Island needs to start filming as soon as possible. I won't be able to attend the Cannes and Berlin film festivals, but I hope to make it in time for the Venice Film Festival in September. Okay, I'll inform these people as soon as possible. Jonathan nodded in agreement. He seemed to understand something. Perhaps Eric was doing this to show that he was in charge of the project. Although the boy in front of him was young, his desire to control was stronger than those ancient emperors who were always worried about being ousted by their princes. It was just a pity for those actors who had been shortlisted but were not selected. Perhaps they were still excitedly preparing for the third round of auditions, but they were destined to be disappointed. Although this matter seemed unfair, Hollywood was like this. There were all kinds of strange things happening one after another, and there was never any fairness to speak of. After sorting out the pile of information in front of him with Jonathan, Eric asked again, "Do you have a location for the shooting?" "I commissioned a friend in England to find a few mansions on some small islands in the English Channel, but I feel that I need to go there personally to see if it's suitable. In addition, I need to communicate with the owners of those mansions personally. You know, many of those historic mansions belong to British aristocrats. Although these people are now in decline, they still maintain an inexplicable arrogance in their bones, so I have to visit them personally. If they feel respected, things will be much easier." Eric inexplicably remembered some things from his previous life, and showed a smile of understanding. Jonathan Demme suddenly said, "Actually, Eric, if you can come in person, things will be smoother. You're British. A lot of British media now regard you as their pride. If you come in person, those small aristocrats will definitely treat you as a guest of honor. Maybe we can even get the right to use some mansions without spending any money." Eric waved his hand. "Forget it. After so many years, I've even forgotten the British accent now. Besides, I can't leave the crew now. By the time Dark War ends, Shock Island will have been shooting for a long time." The shooting process in the next few days was still very smooth. After all, it was a studio shoot, and there were not as many restrictions as outdoor scenes. Cruise also showed his first-class professionalism. If he hadn't coveted the absolute leadership of Eric's crew from time to time, and always criticized the shooting process, Eric would have been happy to continue working with Tom Cruise in the future. However, the possibility of the two working together again in the future was not high. With Cruise's character, perhaps only a director at the level of Spielberg could use him without losing the leadership. In Zhang Heng's previous life, even if many of Cruise's movies were not directed by him, he still firmly grasped the control of the crew. Even the movie giants who worked with him were not allowed to interfere. Eric and Cruise were the same kind of people in this regard, so the possibility of the two working together in the future was destined to be slim. "Brooke, your expression just now was not right. When you saw Andy vomiting blood, you should have shown panic and helplessness, not disgust. So your facial expression should have been widened eyes and mouth slightly, not frowning. Eric frowned at this time, raised his arm and knocked on the watch on his wrist. If 2 more tries still don't work, we'll have to drag it out until the afternoon. You don't want to waste your time and everyone's time, right? Brooke Xiaoxi stood in front of Eric at this time, her eyes downcast like a little girl who had made a mistake. As for whether she was faking it or not, no one could be sure, but this appearance could always weaken a man's anger. Eric also could not help but reprimand her after 5 or 6 NGs. Sorry, Eric, I seem to feel something. Eric sighed and said, then let's try again. Everyone get ready. Brooke Xiaoxi sat back in her seat. This was the scene of Andy and Yo-Yo eating together in the small restaurant after the second meeting. Eric still chose to shoot in the studio, not to save money. With a budget of $40 million, there was no need to save money. He just wanted to finish these scattered indoor scenes as soon as possible. The outdoor scenes were a hard bone to crack, and the huge studio in Colombia could fully provide these conditions. Even the street outside the small restaurant was a full-scale model. Although it was noon, the studio could easily create the conditions of the night. Miss Xiaoxi, don't worry. Take it slow. We have plenty of time. I don't think this is all your problem. Eric is still too young. During the preparation, Cruz chatted with Brooke Xiaoxi eagerly. If Brooke Xiaoxi's performance in a movie directed by Cruz was so bad, he would probably be furious. But now, Cruz seemed to be very willing to see Eric's frustrated face. He himself became a gentleman and tried to get close to the beauty. Thank you for your comfort, Mr. Cruz. Brooke Xiaoxi responded with a smile. So are you free tonight, Miss Xiaoxi? I don't know if I have the honor to have dinner with you. Brooke Xiaoxi raised her eyebrows slightly and subconsciously glanced at Eric not far away. If possible, she would prefer to invite Eric Williams instead of the married man in front of her. However, she couldn't figure out what the young director, who was 5 or 6 years younger than her, was thinking. She was sure that Eric was very interested in her. This was her intuition as a beautiful woman, and she was sure that it was not her own good feeling. When Eric occasionally looked at her, there was an unconcealable eagerness in his eyes, like a 17 or 18-year-old who was eager to have a try. But most of the time he behaved like a sophisticated middle-aged man, unscrupulously admiring her beauty and body with his experienced eyes. Mr. Cruz, can I give you an answer in the afternoon? I'm not sure if I have anything else to do tonight. Brooke Xiaoxi declined a little, but she didn't completely refuse. Chapter 132. Between Eric and Cruz, Brooke Xiaoxi preferred the former. If Eric didn't say anything after today's work, Brooke Xiaoxi wouldn't mind having dinner with Cruz to improve her relationship with him. Although she had been making movies since she was 12 years old, she hadn't fully entered the Hollywood circle. She had always been on the periphery. Of course, Brooke's acting skills weren't up to standard, but more importantly, she didn't have many connections in this area. After she became an adult, Brooke had dreamed of marrying the superstar Michael Jackson for a long time. For this reason, she didn't hesitate to publicly announce to the media that she was still a virgin. She herself once felt that this matter was very promising, so for a long time, she wasn't very enthusiastic about her acting career. But after so many years, she realized that Jackson had always treated her as a good friend. Jackson's heart was completely like a child. He wasn't interested in marriage, and his family was very opposed to him marrying her. Brooke, who was already 24 years old this year, had to plan for her future after her dream of marrying into a rich family was completely shattered. Compared with Jackson's childish temperament, Brooke was much more mature and realistic, and she also knew what her greatest asset was. When Cruz heard Brooke's answer, he still said gracefully, "No problem, I hope to hear good news." The two just said a few words when they received a prompt that the scene was ready. Eric sat in front of the monitor and motioned for the script to start. In the camera, Yo-Yo said with a smile, "What's your name?" She didn't get angry at all when she didn't get an answer. She took the initiative to introduce herself. "My name is Yo-Yo." Cut. A very unpleasant sound was heard. Eric stood up, pointed at Brooke and said loudly, "Curious, curious. How many times have I said that you are very curious about Andy? So open your beautiful eyes a little wider." Again. Everyone in the room felt that Eric was on the verge of exploding. They restarted the camera with trepidation, and at the same time, looked at Brooke worriedly, hoping that this beautiful vase wouldn't make a mistake again. "What's your name?" "My name is Yo-Yo. It's not good for you to know who I am. I read the newspaper that day and I know what you did." "Thank you." "You're welcome. Unfortunately, I don't have the time," Andy said sadly. He picked up the glass of water in front of him and coughed violently. "So what if I have time?" The moment the question left her mouth, Andy coughed out a mouthful of blood that dyed the glass red. Yo-Yo instinctively took a step back. Her eyes widened and her red lips parted slightly. This time, Brooke Scholes did not frown. "Cut. Very good. It's almost perfect, but Brooke's shocked expression is still not natural enough. There's still some time. Let's do it again." Eric's expression relaxed slightly, and so did everyone in the crew. Once again, the shooting did not go as planned. Brooke Xiaoxi frowned reflexively at the last moment. This kind of natural human reaction was difficult to overcome. Eric could only announce that they would take a break and try a few more times after lunch. Just as he got up and was about to eat, Ellen walked over. "Eric, Miss Julia has been waiting for you outside for a while. She doesn't have a pass, so she can't enter." "Julia?" Eric asked in confusion. "Julia Roberts." "Yes," Ellen replied. "Isn't she in Louisiana?" Eric asked in confusion and walked out. Ellen's tone was a little strange. "Maybe she came back because you were injured." Eric shrugged and ignored his assistant's teasing. Walking out of the studio, Eric saw a commercial car parked across the street. After Eric appeared at the gate, the car door opened, and Julia, who was dressed simply and fashionably, walked out with her assistant and 2 bodyguards behind her. Almost at the same time, 7 or 8 paparazzi, who had been waiting nearby for a long time, began to take pictures of Julia. "Hey, big star." Eric walked closer and saw the situation around him. He could not help but shout jokingly, "Hey, big director." Julia was not to be outdone. The two hugged gently, and this scene immediately caused a burst of crazy clicking sounds. After the paparazzi finished taking pictures, they began to rush forward with their recording devices and quickly ask questions. The questions were nothing more than why Julia had returned to Los Angeles, the progress of the new film, and of course, they did not forget Eric's dark war. Under the protection of the bodyguards and assistants, the two quickly got into Julia's commercial car without saying a word, and then started it and left. A large group of paparazzi quickly climbed into their cars and motorcycles and followed. In front of the studio door, Brooke Xiaoxi, who had just walked out to eat lunch across the street, saw this scene and her eyes were full of envy. She had been famous for so long, but she had never enjoyed the escort of paparazzi. Julia, an actress who had risen to fame for only a few months, had easily gained such attention. She looked around in disappointment. There were a few paparazzi waiting outside, hoping to interview the shooting of Dark War, but they had just left with Julia and Eric. A great beauty like her was standing here, but no one came up to take a photo or interview her. The fat security guard with a wretched face in the security booth next to her was staring at her long legs, which made Brooke Xiaoxi even more irritated and disgusted. Brooke Xiaoxi thought of Julia's rise to fame and became eager again. "Maybe I should wait patiently," Brooke Xiaoxi murmured and made up her mind to refuse Cruz's dinner invitation. Compared to Eric, who could provide an opportunity to become famous, although Cruz was famous, he was only an actor after all. And it was impossible to create a scandal with him because Cruz was already married. Doing so would only bring about the opposite effect. If Eric Williams was still indifferent after the shooting of Dark War was completed, Brooke Xiaoxi would also make up her mind to take the initiative to approach him. Before that, she had to wait patiently. There was a big gap between the benefits of taking the initiative and being passive. These two are Hunter and Chris. In the back seat of the business car, Julia took the initiative to introduce her 2 drivers and bodyguards to Eric. There was a hint of pride in her tone. Before Eric could react, the little freckled assistant, Allison Green, who had been with Julia for a long time, couldn't help but chuckle. Julia awkwardly knocked on her assistant's head. "Allison, be careful or I'll deduct your salary." Eric reached out and raised the soundproof partition between the driver's seat and the back seat, then smiled and said, "Okay, I already know that you are a world-famous star now. Where are we going?" "Not far. I booked a restaurant. We'll be there in 5 or 6 minutes. Don't worry, it won't delay your afternoon shoot," Julia said, pointing to Eric's forehead that was still wrapped in gauze. "What's going on here? I was shocked when I heard the news." "I can prove this." At that time Ugh. Allison was about to say something, but Julia covered her mouth and glared at her threateningly. "Allison, I'll really deduct your salary." After getting Allison's pleading look, Julia let go of the girl. Eric smiled and teased, "Allison, you can't reveal Julia's privacy in front of outsiders, or the consequences will be very serious." Allison rubbed her little face. "Of course I won't, but Mr. Williams is not an outsider." She was very clear about the matter between Eric and Julia. And in her heart, she also hoped that Eric and Julia could get together. That was why she couldn't help but say that Julia lost her composure when she saw Eric injured and unconscious to get closer to him. Chapter 133. In an exquisite restaurant, Eric finished ordering and watched with interest as Julia elegantly communicated with the waiter and skillfully arranged the tableware in front of her with a smile. "What are you looking at?" Julia felt Eric's gaze and asked curiously. Eric shook his head and said, "Nothing, I just suddenly remembered the first time I met you at Jeff's restaurant. I feel like you've changed a lot." Julia obviously didn't want Eric to mention her most down-and-out period, so she glared at him and said, "Are you trying to take credit?" "Of course not," Eric said with a smile. "I just think it's interesting that Cinderella became a princess in the blink of an eye." "Don't mention Hollywood Cinderella in front of me, okay? I'm so annoyed by this title." Julia rolled her eyes. Although this title contained the envy of the media and the public, it was also mixed with a lot of ridicule. "Okay then, why did you suddenly come back?" "I took on an endorsement and rushed back to shoot the commercial, and I also wanted to visit you." Julia stuttered slightly at the end of her sentence. In fact, she mainly came back to visit Eric. Shooting the commercial could be said to be an excuse. If she wanted, shooting the commercial in Louisiana would not be a problem at all. Anyway, she was in a crew, and a lot of equipment and personnel were ready-made. But after all, Eric was in a coma for more than 10 hours. Although he was safe in the end, this incident caused a stir in Hollywood. Eric single-handedly made her from an unknown actress to a Hollywood superstar. If she didn't show up from beginning to end while Eric's injury was fully recovered, it was inevitable that some media would label her as ungrateful. The reason why Julia waited for Eric outside the studio today instead of visiting him in private was because she wanted to create some exposure. Julia was self-taught in this regard. Although Wind and Moon was still screening, she had disappeared from the media for a whole month. The small town in Louisiana where Steel Magnolias was shot was too remote. In addition, the director, Herbert Ross, was worried about being disturbed by reporters, so the news of the shooting location was tightly sealed. Even if a few paparazzi found the place, they wouldn't be able to get any valuable news. At the same time, Julia was a little afraid of visiting Eric in private. She still remembered the situation when she secretly visited Eric in private. Every time she recalled the scene when she was severely reprimanded by Eric and couldn't help but cry, Julia hated this man who didn't understand her feelings. "Thank you for your concern, Julia," Eric replied seriously. Then he asked curiously, "By the way, what advertisement are you shooting?" "Lancome's perfume endorsement." Julia raised a few fingers and waved them in front of Eric with a little pride. "1 year this amount. Wow, that's a huge sum of money." Eric was too lazy to tease her. "I don't mind you being a little vain, but if you want to show off, you should find a suitable partner. Is it really appropriate to do this in front of me? Okay, I know you don't like it. You don't have to look at me like that." Julia pursed her red lips in dissatisfaction. Then she remembered that her mouth would appear even bigger if she did that. He was dissatisfied with that, so she quickly stopped smiling. "I can't compare to you. I just suffered a small injury, and I attracted the attention of the entire United States. I even stole the limelight of the recent Oscars. It should be said that I acted as a shield for this year's Oscars. If I wasn't injured, this year's Oscars would have received even more criticism. Eric shrugged and replied, "Actually, the Academy should thank me properly. I'm not too sure about that, but when I was in Louisiana, I only saw the director of this year's Oscars, Alan Carl, announce that he would never accept another invitation to direct a gala again. But things shouldn't be as bad as you say, right? It's much worse than you think, but I can't tell you too much because I have signed a confidentiality contract with many other presenters and performers. We promised that we wouldn't mention anything about this year's Oscars to the public for the next 20 years. And these days, Disney also came over to join in the fun. They threatened to sue the award ceremony for using Snow White's portrait without permission. Anyway, it's a mess. If it weren't for the fact that my injury attracted most of the media's attention, the Academy would at least have to make a public apology to appease the anger of the media and the public." Julia's eyes widened as she listened to Eric's narration, but in the end she couldn't understand too much. After all, she didn't personally participate in this year's Oscars. She didn't even have time to watch the award ceremony that night because she had to shoot some scenes. So the topic quickly shifted to Eric's injury. The girl was most concerned about the injury on Eric's forehead. "Hey, it was inconvenient in the car just now. Can you tell me now? What's with the injury on your forehead? I don't believe it's as simple as falling down the stairs. There must be more to it." Eric spread out his hands helplessly and said, "But that's the truth." "Definitely not." Julia revealed a sly smile. "I read the newspaper carefully a few days ago. After you were injured that day, it was Drew and your girlfriend, Jennifer Aniston, who sent you to the hospital together. And then," Julia leaned forward slightly and said in a low voice, "I think it must be your girlfriend, Jennifer Aniston, who suddenly went to your house that morning and found you and Drew." She impulsively picked up a vase or something and smashed it, right?" Surprise flashed across Eric's face. Although Julia's guess was far from the truth, one thing was true. He was hit by Jennifer Aniston's heart-wrenching talent. Fortunately, Virginia was smart enough to not show up during the whole incident. She only visited him in the hospital with the others after his injury was completely stabilized. Julia keenly caught the momentary change in Eric's expression. Her red lips parted slightly, revealing a surprised expression. "No way, did I guess right?" "Absolutely not. I swear to the lamp." Eric smiled and pointed to the crystal chandelier above his head. "I accidentally fell. My pathology report has been on many newspapers. You must have seen it. I have contusions all over my body. You don't think Jennifer Aniston has the ability to cause such extensive injuries to me, do you?" "That's not necessarily true." The girl looked at Eric from head to toe unconvinced. She seemed to be thinking about how to cause such injuries. "Forget it. Let's not talk about this unpleasant topic. Let's talk about steel magnolias. After all, I only communicated with Mr. Herbert Ross a few times over the phone. Since you're the person involved, how do you feel?" Julia shook her head honestly. She still wasn't sure why Eric had taken a liking to this movie, and why he had forcefully suppressed her salary in order to let her participate in it. In Julia's opinion, Steel Magnolias was a trivial story with no central point at all. A group of housewives lived ordinary lives day after day. There were all kinds of holidays, all kinds of parting, and all kinds of trivial things in life. "I still feel that this story is a little too ordinary. There's no highlight?" Eric was about to answer when the waiter served the dishes they had ordered. He even opened the red wine for them in front of them. After patiently waiting for the waiter to finish all this, Eric fiddled with the dishes in front of him and asked, "Then, what do you think a movie should have?" Julia took a sip of red wine, put down the glass, and thought for a while. She waved her hand and said, At least there should be an unforgettable love story, where the male and female protagonists love each other to death, or a big scene, such as a flying car, an explosion, flames soaring into the sky, or something like that." The girl hurriedly nodded. "Yes, at least there should be these things, right? I won't criticize you since we're in public. If you want to know why, come to my house tonight, and I'll give you a detailed analysis of the elements of a movie's success," Eric said as he narrowed his eyes and sized up the girl opposite him with a smirk on his face. Well, forget it. As if being tickled by Eric's gaze, Julia subconsciously leaned back and hurriedly refused. She knew that if she went, she would definitely be scolded again. Eric was only teasing the girl a little. He quickly put away his cynical expression and analyzed seriously. Actually, the success or failure of a movie depends on whether the director's story can resonate with the audience. I've carefully studied the script of Steel Magnolias, and it's a good story that puts the warmth of the ordinary into the trivial scenes. While it resonates with the audience, it's also unwittingly tear-jerking. Julia didn't understand, but she nodded as if she was convinced. Then she asked the question she was most concerned about. How much do you think this movie can get at the box office? What do you think? Eric asked back. Julia hesitated for a moment and raised 2 fingers. She quickly felt that this number was underestimating her, so she added 2 more fingers. After hesitating for a moment, she withdrew 1 finger. She thought that it would be good enough if the movie could get 30 million yuan at the box office. Also, with the scale of the movie's investment, Firefly could still make a small profit. In fact, Julia felt that if she continued to act in romantic comedies, even if it was a relatively similar theme, with the influence of Wind and Moon, the movie would be able to easily earn 50 to 60 million yuan at the box office. However, Julia really didn't have any confidence in this movie that was about family trivia. Do you have so little confidence in me? I just don't have confidence in this movie, Julia said honestly. Eric calmly wiped his mouth with a napkin and smiled. How about we make a bet? I bet this movie won't be less than 50 million yuan at the box office. What's the wager? Julia asked curiously. Eric smirked again. If you lose, you'll come to my house and be my maid for a week. If I lose, I'll be your chauffeur for a week. If it weren't for Eric's sinister expression when he said the word maid, Julia almost agreed. She felt that she had a 70% chance of winning. Also, being a maid in this era was a very serious job. But when she noticed Eric's expression, Julia keenly sensed that something was wrong. She decisively refused. No, I don't want to bet with you. How about 60 million yuan? Not only was Julia not tempted, but she also refused even more firmly. Don't even think about it. Because Eric still had filming in the afternoon, the meal ended in half an hour. However, it also provided a lot of photo material for the paparazzi. In short, there would definitely be a scandal between Eric and Julia in the media tomorrow. After lunch, Julia sent Eric back to the studio. When are you going back to the set? Eric asked when they parted at the entrance of the studio. The flight is at 4 in the afternoon. Julia didn't get out of the car. She replied in the car. By the way, Eric, the shooting budget seems to be insufficient. Maybe we need at least another 2 million USD. Mr. Ross asked you to say that? Julia nodded. Herbert Ross didn't know that Eric had noticed that his budget was tight, and was even prepared to increase the budget. Considering that Julia and Eric were close, he asked the girl to test Eric when Julia came back. After all, this was a low-budget movie. If the budget was increased by another 2 million, the cost would reach 10 million US dollars. The box office would have to reach more than 33 million to recoup the cost. Although Julia was joining, Herbert Ross wasn't sure if his family movie without comedy elements would reach a box office of more than 30 million. No problem. Eric nodded. Tell Mr. Ross to ask Jeffrey for money. Then I'll thank you on behalf of Mr. Ross. Julia smiled and said goodbye to Eric before driving away. The first scene in the afternoon was the scene of Andy and Yo-Yo in the small restaurant. For some reason, after the meal, Brooke Xiaoxi returned to the state she was in the morning. She repeatedly NG'd this scene several times. Although the girl repeatedly apologized with a pitiful expression, Eric couldn't help but get angry. At the same time, he drew a big cross in his heart for Brooke Xiaoxi. If I don't work with her anymore, this beautiful vase is really tormenting me. I didn't waste my time winning so many Golden Raspberry Awards. It's better if she continues to harm others in independent movies. At the same time, Eric also dismissed the idea of having a relationship with Brooke Xiaoxi. Hollywood was so big, and there were so many beautiful girls. One more wouldn't make a difference. After half an hour, the scene in the restaurant was finally over. Eric, I'm really sorry. My performance was a bit bad. Brooke Xiaoxi finished her scene, which meant that all her work for the day was done. She packed up her things and went to the dressing room to change her clothes. When she was about to leave, she came up to Eric again. At this time, the woman's clothes were no longer the black professional outfit that she wore in the previous shot. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but the woman was now wearing a pair of tight dark blue high-waisted jeans. Her slender long legs were exposed in front of everyone without any cover. Almost all the men in the crew intentionally or unintentionally cast their eyes on the girl. At the same time, they remembered Brooke Xiaoxi's famous jeans advertisement. Many people even had a thought in their minds. Was there really nothing between the girl and the jeans now? Although Eric dismissed some of the thoughts, he didn't mind taking advantage of this kind of girl. Admiring Brooke Xiaoxi's delicate appearance and perfect body curves, his expression softened a little. It's okay, Brooke. I hope you can seriously experience your remaining scenes when you go back. Those are all outdoor scenes. If you waste too much time like this, it will definitely affect the shooting progress and consume unnecessary budget. Well, I will definitely work hard. Brooke Xiaoxi nodded and looked at Eric seriously. Her high heels rubbed against the floor a few times, and her long legs also followed in a slightly seductive posture. After waiting for a few seconds, she found that Eric had already looked away. He had no intention of inviting her to dinner at all. Brooke Xiaoxi didn't dare to be too obvious. If she was rejected by Eric, then she might be laughed at by the crew, especially Cruz, who was clearly rejected by her before. Therefore, she could only say with some disappointment, "Then goodbye, Eric." "Goodbye, someone will inform you of the next scene." Eric raised his chin and nodded at the girl. He pinched a pencil and made a few marks on the script. He then turned and began to tell his assistant something. Brooke Xiaoxi paused for a few seconds and could only leave in disappointment. She had just hinted so clearly, but Eric was still indifferent. This made Brooke Xiaoxi feel a little frustrated. How long will it take for Hanks to arrive? Eric didn't care about Brooke Xiaoxi's departure. Although he also noticed the other party's hint, since he had already made a decision, he would certainly not change it. In Hollywood, if you couldn't resist the temptation, it was likely to lead to very bad results. 10 minutes, Alan said. Okay, hurry up and clean up here. Let's move to another set. Eric looked at his watch and thought secretly. Cruz's one-man show had been completed. Next, Eric planned to shoot a few scenes of Cruz and Hanks in the small bar. Today would also be the first confrontation between the two protagonists. Thinking of the almost parallel acting careers of these two big names in his previous life, Eric couldn't help but feel a little excited. He was looking forward to what kind of sparks would be created when the two of them acted together. Chapter 134. Hi, Tom. As soon as Hanks appeared in the studio, Eric greeted him warmly. He preferred the mild-tempered Hanks compared to Cruz, who had always been polite to each other. Hi, Eric, I'm not late, am I? Hanks asked as he hugged Eric. Of course not. Eric nodded to Hanks' assistant and turned to Hanks. It will take about 15 minutes to set up the scene. You can take the opportunity to do your makeup. The two walked side by side to the dressing room. Hanks greeted the crew members warmly. He looked around and asked curiously in a low voice, "Where's Cruz?" "Maybe he went to touch up his makeup," Eric said lightly. Hanks nodded and did not say anything. After several meetings, Hanks did not have a good impression of the actor who shared the same name as himself. Cruz was too arrogant. Even if he was polite to someone, it would still make people feel like they were being given charity. Everyone in the crew had already completed the makeup process, so it did not take too long for Hanks to do his makeup. After the breakfast scene was set up, Nickel, the cameraman, walked to Eric, who was talking to Hanks and Cruz. "Eric, you'd better come and take a look." Eric apologized to the two superstars and got up to follow Nickel to the corner of the restaurant where a camera was set up. "Eric, look here. There will be a quick sweep later, but I can only operate the camera from this position." Nickel demonstrated awkwardly. "You see, this is a little difficult to operate. It's very awkward, and it's hard to control the strength." Although Eric was not as professional as Nickel, he knew a lot of shooting techniques. He stepped forward and tried to operate the camera. It was really awkward, but the best position was occupied by the wall behind him. "Nickel, what do you think?" Eric put down the camera and asked as he clapped his hands. "I can only try a few times. This position is the best shooting angle. If it doesn't work, and you want the best effect." Nickel pointed behind Eric. "Then we can only tear down this wall. Let's try a few times first," Eric said. He did not mind tearing down the wall. After all, this was a studio, not an outdoor scene. Columbia would definitely cooperate, but at least it would waste another hour. "Okay." Nickel nodded. "Then let's start." The small restaurant scene had a total of 3 scenes. In the first scene, the two of them were eating breakfast as complete strangers. Of course, according to the plot, Andy had begun to pay attention to Sean at this time, but Sean was completely unaware. In the second scene, the two of them brushed shoulders. Andy left a teacup cushion with the number 13 written on it for Sean. The third scene was also the longest one. Andy used 1 minute to convince Sean to cooperate with the police to capture the big villain, the bald monk, and avenge his father. Attention all personnel. Dark War, Act 12, Scene 1, Action. Sean stared at the newspaper in front of him and ate his cake. When he heard the restaurant door open, he naturally looked up and quickly turned his eyes back to the newspaper. "Good." Eric gave Hanks a thumbs up. Next was the scene of Andy, played by Cruz, eating while staring at the TV above his head. This scene was not difficult for Cruz at all. Eric gave him a thumbs up as well. In the original version, this scene would appear 3 times. This should be an animation that Andy liked very much. Unfortunately, with only 4 weeks left to live, every time he saw this familiar scene, Andy would feel sad that he didn't have much time left. This was also the reason why Andy would be in a daze every time he saw this scene. And here, Eric did not intend to use a random animation to make up the numbers. He planned to use the scenes from Friends. Although Friends only existed in Eric's plan now, when Island Horror and Smell a Woman were on the right track, Jeffrey would start preparing for Friends. It was only April now. As long as the 6 protagonists could be confirmed, Eric would have enough time to shoot a few classic scenes from Friends and add them to the movie. The new movie would have a TV series directed by Eric Williams himself, which was a good gimmick for the movie's promotion. At the same time, it would promote Friends, which was another win-win situation. After the 2 scenes were completed, it was time for the most difficult scene, the shake shot. After the script was done, Eric stared at the monitor. Eric operated the camera to stop on Hank's face for a second, and then began to shake rapidly. Eric clearly felt the difficulty and unevenness of the change of scene. Although the camera stopped accurately on Cruz's side profile in the end, Eric could only shout cut. Next, Nickel tried 6 more times in a row, but all of them ended in failure. Eric knew the reason for the flaw in the shot, so he patiently let Nickel try again and again. But after the 11th failure, Cruz finally became a little impatient. He had eaten many pieces of cream cake in a row, and did not understand why he had to try so many times for such a simple shot. While the staff adjusted the camera back to its original position, Cruz stood up and glanced at Nickel, whose forehead was full of sweat, with some contempt. He said to Eric, "Eric, maybe I can introduce a better cameraman to you." Cruz did not intend to lower his voice at all. He said this in front of everyone, and the scene immediately became awkward. Due to his awkward posture, Nickel had to operate the machine more than 10 times in a row. His waist was starting to hurt. He didn't expect that his efforts would receive such an evaluation. He wanted to glare at Cruz, but he was afraid that it would make things difficult for Eric. He could only stand there helplessly. Many people in the crew were dissatisfied with Cruz's rude words. They had worked with Nickel for many years and knew Nickel's ability very well. Although they had just experienced more than 10 failures in a row, they more or less understood the reason from Nickel's posture when operating the camera. They patiently accompanied Nickel to try again and again. Facing the gaze of the crowd, Eric knew that this matter had to be handled carefully. Otherwise it would cause a conflict between the crew and the actors. However, it was not easy to appease Cruz's emotions and not arouse the dissatisfaction of the staff. After thinking for a moment, Eric could only stand up and walk to the camera. He patiently explained to Cruz why this shot was so easy to fail. After listening to Eric's explanation, Cruz also realized that he had just wronged Nickel. He shrugged and smiled faintly at the cameraman. "I'm really sorry. Then let's continue." After that, Cruz sat back in his seat again. Eric patted Nickel's shoulder comfortingly and said softly, "Try 2 or 3 more times. If it still doesn't work, we'll tear down the wall." Nickel knew that Eric had been very protective of him by personally explaining the reason to Cruz, so he did not mind Cruz's insincere apology. Instead, he nodded gratefully to Eric. "I'll try my best." Although this small incident seemed to have passed easily, it was destined to leave some traces in many people's hearts. Anyway, several crew members who had a very good impression of Cruz because of his series of movies were no longer enthusiastic about him. Perhaps it was luck or other reasons, but the second attempt finally passed. When Eric shouted "good," many people could not help but applaud. Nickel also breathed a sigh of relief and shook his sore arm hard. Next, the second scene where the two of them brushed past each other was also easily passed. Finally, it was the first scene where Cruz and Hanks acted together. "Hey Inspector, you're so early?" The waitress at the restaurant saw Sean open the door and greeted him warmly. "Yes, I have an appointment with a friend," Sean replied and walked to the bar. Andy's mouth was stuffed with pastries. When he heard Sean's words, he smiled with a smug expression. These days he had fooled Sean, an elite police officer who used to be all-powerful, in circles. He was indeed proud of himself. Sean came to Andy with a sullen face and slapped a teacup with the number 13 on it on the bar. "Have a seat," Andy said, putting down the cup. Sean took out a photo from his suit pocket. "You're very accurate, Mr. Zhang. Did you find it?" Andy turned his head. "You stole the gem and avenged your father. Why did you ask me to come out? I told you that this game would take 3 days." Sean pointed to the pocket where he usually kept his ID. "You're not in charge now. I'm a police officer. Clean up the warehouse, change the light tubes." As soon as Cruz finished his line, Eric shouted for him to stop. "Here's the thing, Cruz, your smile has to be more sarcastic." Eric first walked to Cruz and gave his opinion. At the same time, he grinned and wanted to demonstrate for Cruz, but found that he did not have the talent of demonstrating everything to actors like Sue Quebec. He could only say in disappointment, "Well, let's stop for 2 minutes. You can think about it." After instructing Cruz, Eric turned to Hanks. "Hanks, you're too embarrassed to hear Andy's ridicule. Although you're very embarrassed in your heart, you also have your own self-esteem. So when you're embarrassed, you need to do some body language, such as nodding, to cover up your embarrassment." "Well, Eric, I'll think about it." Hanks nodded. Chapter 135. Eric returned to his seat. 2 minutes later, the filming began again. This scene was more than 3 minutes long, so it was impossible to finish it in one go. Eric divided the 3-minute scene into 7 subscenes of less than 30 seconds on average. For every scene, Eric strove to achieve perfection. Therefore, the number of NGs far exceeded the other scenes he had shot in the past few days. Cruz and Hanks gradually seemed to realize something. They became more and more strict with their performance. In the end, it was obvious that they were competing with each other. Sometimes, when Eric felt that the effect was good enough, Cruz or Hanks would take the initiative to point out the flaws in their performance and ask for a retake. Eric was quite happy to see this happen. He did not know when the two superstars would work together again. Perhaps they would never have the chance to work together again. Therefore, Eric also wanted to leave a perfect scene in this movie. Cut. After another NG, Eric looked at his watch. It had been more than an hour since the last scene began. Out of the 7 subscenes of 3 minutes, only 5 of them had been completed. The 2 most important scenes, Andy's lobbying, had not been filmed. However, it was already time to get off work. Looking at Cruz and Hanks, who were still sparking, and Joe Pacey, who had been waiting for nearly an hour to act as the inspector of the Key Case Investigation Unit, Eric reminded them. "It's time to get off work, you two." After Eric finished speaking, he looked at Cruz and Hanks with anticipation. As an Asian, he did not have any objection to working overtime. In fact, he felt that it was a matter of course. In his heart, He also wanted to complete the 1-hour overtime scene. Therefore, he hoped that the two would take the initiative to propose to work overtime to complete the scene. However, Eric realized that he had seriously underestimated the stubbornness of Europeans and Americans when it came to the 8-hour working day. When they heard Eric's words, Cruz and Hanks, who were originally eager to give it a try, stood up and shook hands with a smile. They looked like they had met their match. Then, they said goodbye to Eric and began to pack their things to leave. From beginning to end, they had no intention of working overtime. Eric complained in his heart. He could only shrug helplessly and announce that the crew was done. After that, Eric took the time to walk over to Joe Pacey. "Sorry, Joe. I made you wait for an hour in vain." Joe Pacey didn't mind at all. He shook his head and said in his unique voice, "It's nothing, Eric. I've been watching a wonderful performance for an entire hour. I'm a little worried that my performance won't be as good as I expected." "You don't have to worry about that at all. I think Hank should be the one worried. I think he could be stolen by your character at any time. Your character's lines and actions are too funny." "That's true, but I haven't acted in a comedy before. You know, The Raging Bull and Once Upon a Time in America that I've acted in, as well as the recent Raging Bull, aren't comedies." "Joe, I think you're more suited for comedy. Maybe after this movie, you'll discover your talent for comedy. To be honest, you know Home Alone, right? When I was shooting this movie, I thought that you'd be the most suitable actor to play the role of the older, stupid thief Harry." Joe Pacey's eyes widened slightly. He felt that Eric wasn't lying to him at all. This was Home Alone, a movie that was about to break $300 million at the box office. Then why? Joe Pacey made a meaningless gesture. Of course, he knew what it meant to miss out on Home Alone. Eric understood what he meant. He shrugged helplessly and explained, "Because I couldn't afford to hire you at the time. The budget for Home Alone was too small." "Maybe you could have tried to invite me at the time. You know that's impossible. If I asked you to pay the current Harry actor $20,000, you would have rejected it without even thinking about it." Joe Pacey understood that this was the case. Although he wasn't a famous actor, he was still nominated for the Best Supporting Actor award. Unless he could predict the future, he definitely wouldn't accept $20,000. Joe Pacey shook his head and said, "This is really regrettable. Okay, let's not talk about this anymore. Don't we have a chance to work together now? This is really... Eric, you're bringing this up now because you want me to lose sleep tonight. I can't believe I missed such a good opportunity." Everyone will miss thousands of opportunities in their life, so this isn't a big deal. Go back and wash your face, brush your teeth, take a bath, and if you can't do it, drink a few sips of wine. You'll forget about it after a good night's sleep. Eric patted Joe Pacey's shoulder and comforted him. "How can I forget about it?" Joe Pacey rolled his eyes at Eric and shook his head. "Forget it, I'll go back first. This is really..." Seeing Joe Pacey leave with a disappointed expression, Eric began to regret telling him the news. He originally wanted to use this small matter to get closer to Joe Pacey. Hopefully, Joe Pacey wouldn't become Xianglin Saw and repeatedly say, "I can't believe I missed out on Home Alone." After arranging everything, Eric was about to leave. However, at the entrance of the studio, he saw the director of Smelling Women, Martin Brayster. His assistant was carrying a thick stack of documents. Eric knew what was inside. After greeting him, Eric asked, "Martin, didn't you say that the list of candidates would only be confirmed the day after tomorrow? Why is it so fast?" "Sorry, Eric. The original plan was the day after tomorrow, but due to various reasons, the selection was completed 2 days in advance. Al also wants to start filming as soon as possible, so I can only wait for you here." "Why isn't Al here?" Eric asked curiously. Martin explained, "Al has already started to figure out the role. He's been adapting to the lifestyle of a blind person for the past few days. He specifically told me not to disturb him." Eric nodded in understanding. After thinking for a while, he pointed at a Passat parked not far from Martin. "Is that your car?" Martin nodded. "Then let's talk in the car. I happen to be going to Malibu. Is it convenient for you to send me there?" "Of course." The few of them got into the car. Eric told Martin's assistant the address, and Martin's assistant started the car. In the back seat, Eric first opened the list of candidates for one of the most important leads, the middle school student Charlie Simmons. Martin explained, "Eric, these are all outstanding young people who have passed 2 rounds of auditions. As there are more middle school students, there are a total of 30 candidates. After you choose the actor to play Charlie Simmons, we can directly choose a series of Charlie's classmates from the remaining list." Okay. Eric took out a thick stack of documents from the folder and asked casually, "By the way, what about Miss Gabrielle Anwar, who I introduced?" Martin felt that the petite girl might have some relationship with Eric, so he explained in detail. After her role was confirmed, the girl went back to England a few days ago, but she came back very quickly. She's currently staying in a hotel on Wilshire Avenue. By the way, when you were in a coma, she also went to visit you. Eric, do you need the address of her hotel? That won't be necessary, Eric said casually as he scanned the list. The 30 candidates were arranged in alphabetical order according to the actors' surnames. Thus, Eric saw the names of 2 Hollywood superstars side by side at the beginning of the D letter. Chapter 136. Matt Damon, Leonardo DiCaprio. A long list of movie names floated through his mind. Eric shook his head and threw the flying images into the corner. He continued to read as if nothing had happened. Other than these 2 superstars from his previous life, he did not see any other familiar faces. Of course, the original Chris O'Donnell had also been blown away by the flapping of butterfly wings. Of course, even if he appeared, Eric would not give the role to Chris, because his presence in the original version was too weak. Although Al Pacino's performance was too eye-catching, his own performance was not outstanding. After quickly reading through the 30 files, Eric asked Martin Brest for a pen, and made a tick behind the names of Matt Damon and Xiao Li. After hesitating for a while, Eric finally decided to choose Matt Damon. Matt Damon had just turned 18 this year. He had a sunny and handsome appearance, which was exactly the same as Charlie's image. In comparison, Xiao Li's current image was a bit more roguish. After drawing a circle around Matt Damon's name, Eric said to Martin Brest, who had been watching his actions, "Martin, give the role of Charlie Simmons to Matt Damon. As for Leonardo DiCaprio, give him the role of Charlie's classmate, George. Also, I don't care if they have an agency or an agent now. If they want to get the role, they have to join UTA." "Eric, what if they don't agree to join UTA?" Eric looked at Martin strangely. "What right do they have to disagree?" Martin heard Eric's matter-of-fact tone, and was slightly stunned. He recalled the information about Matt Damon and Xiao Li and quickly laughed. Indeed, the 2 rookies have no reason to refuse. So in just a few words, the 2 roles were decided. Both Island Horror, and Knowing a Woman by Smelling Fragrance, were Firefly's film projects. The 2 crews also had contact with each other, so Martin Brest already knew about Eric's process of choosing the roles in Island Horror. He and Jonathan Demme felt the same way. They both thought that Eric just wanted to show his dominance of the movie, so he took the final decision for the roles. Although Martin felt that Eric's actions were a bit careless and childish, he did not refute anything. In the eyes of Martin, who was almost 40 years old, Eric was indeed just a child. It was understandable for him to do such a thing. What he and Al could do was to carefully screen the suitable candidates. No matter who Eric chose, they could guarantee that the other party would be competent for the role. Eric had no intention of defending himself. His reason for doing so was just as Martin and the others thought. If he was a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s, he might be able to show his magnanimity by delegating power and gain more admiration. But he was only 18 years old now. If he did that, people would think that he was young and easy to fool. So he had to show his strength everywhere. It was the same for movies and women. It took 40 minutes to travel from the studio in Colombia to Malibu. Eric quickly circled the list of all the actors. Part of it was based on Martin's advice, and the other part was based on his impression of some of the actors in his mind. Martin's car stopped at an intersection on the coastal road in Malibu. Eric put on his sunglasses and baseball cap and got out of the car. "Thank you for driving me here, Martin. Goodbye." "Goodbye." Martin rolled down the window and winked at Eric. He waved his hand and asked his assistant to drive away. After the Passat turned around and left, Eric turned around and walked to the small villa not far away. When he arrived at Virginia's house, Eric took out a key to open the door and walked in. It was already evening, and the lights in the villa were already on. When Eric walked to the door opened from the inside. Virginia was wearing casual home clothes and carrying 2 big bags in front of Eric. Ah! When Virginia saw Eric suddenly appear in front of her, she was obviously shocked. The bags in her hands fell to the ground. Eric, why are you here? The woman hurriedly picked up the garbage bags on the ground and put them next to the door. She opened the door a little to let Eric in. Eric smiled and hugged the woman. He kissed Virginia's face and said, "Why are you so nervous? Don't tell me you're hiding a man at home? I just didn't expect you to come to my place these days." Virginia rolled her eyes gently. "Even if I'm hiding a man, what can you do to me?" Eric pinched Virginia's face and said seriously, "Well, there are many ways to punish women. In some countries in the Middle East, women will be stoned to death. Everyone will work together to stone the woman to death. In the East, there is a kind of pig cage in ancient times. The woman will be stripped naked and put into a big cage. Then she will be thrown into a pond to drown." "Ha! How can there be such a barbaric thing?" Virginia shuddered. "That's why I like the way some places punish women in India. It's very humane." "Oh," Virginia said, giving him a curious look. Eric smirked. "In some places in India, if a woman is found, the village chief will gather all the strong men in the village and serve the woman one by one. It's guaranteed that the woman will not think about men for the rest of her life." "Wow, that's disgusting. Strong men? You're only 18 years old. Where did you learn so much nonsense?" "I can't help it. I'm born so knowledgeable." Eric spread his hands and said honestly. "Then, Mr. Erudite, do you have a way to punish a man who betrays his girlfriend? Tell me the cruelest way to punish him?" Eric choked. He coughed and said, I really don't have that." "TSK." Virginia rolled her eyes and struggled out of Eric's arms. "Stop talking nonsense. You go in first. I'll throw away the garbage. Let me do it. It looks quite heavy." Eric grabbed the plastic bag. He did not know what was inside, but it was indeed very heavy. "Just throw it in the trash can at the door." Virginia saw that Eric had already grabbed the bag and did not stop him. She pointed at the door. Eric threw away the garbage and returned to the house. He saw Virginia's figure busy in the kitchen. He walked in and hugged the woman from behind. He looked at Virginia adding sugar and milk powder into the coffee cup. "Actually, I don't really like coffee. I'd rather drink plain water. I heard that drinking plain water is one of the secrets to longevity." Virginia smiled and continued to add coffee powder into the cup. "You're so young. Why are you thinking about longevity? Are you afraid of death?" "Of course not. I'm not afraid of death. I'm only afraid of regret." "Regret? What regret?" "Yes, what regret?" Eric rested his chin on the woman's shoulder and thought for a while. His regret in his previous life was not being able to see his child grow up, and in the end, not being able to film his own movie. At the time of his rebirth, the film industry in China was in a period of explosion. Although he was almost 40 years old, he still did not completely give up. He also discussed with a few friends that the film industry was so good. Maybe he could spend a few years to come up with a good script, and use the connections he had accumulated over the years to get an investment to make his own movie. Unfortunately, before the plan could be implemented, he inexplicably came to this time and space. Now it was less than a year. His achievements in his previous life were enough to make him a super winner in life. It would be too pretentious to talk about regrets. "Why are you suddenly not talking?" The woman turned her head and asked as she carefully poured the boiled water into the coffee cup. "Nothing. I'm just thinking about what regrets I'll have if I suddenly die now." Virginia put down the kettle and turned around to look at Eric's face. "Eric, if you've been thinking about death recently, I suggest you find a psychiatrist as soon as possible. Are you under too much pressure?" "Of course not." Eric saw the deep worry in the woman's eyes. He hurriedly denied. He wanted to explain but did not know where to start. Let's talk in the living room. Virginia handed a cup of coffee to Eric and picked up her own cup. The two of them walked to the living room together. After sitting down on the sofa, Virginia asked, "Why are you here today? Don't you live with Jennifer Aniston?" Eric smiled bitterly. After what happened, it would be strange if Jennifer would be like that. She's renting her own place in Burbank. If it weren't for the accidental fall from the stairs, Eric would have a headache trying to persuade Jennifer Aniston to come back. That morning, when he woke up from his coma, Eric took advantage of the opportunity when Jennifer Aniston was weak from worry and sleepiness. He successfully tricked Jennifer Aniston into joining the cast of Friends. But he made another big mistake. Seeing that the two girls were so sleepy that their heads kept nodding, he put Jennifer Aniston and Drew to sleep on either side of him. At noon, he had lunch with Jeffrey and Kapoor. When he returned to the ward, he found that the two girls were awake. And the scene was quite chaotic. Pillows and blankets were kicked all over the floor, and a scaffold for a drip was pushed over. The two girls were like two crazy wildcats, twisting together. Their clothes were messy, and they were arguing and pushing each other, trying to drive each other off. It was as if it wasn't a piece of paper, but Eric himself. Eric coaxed the two darling girls. Then, Jennifer Aniston wiped her tears and blamed Eric for being biased. Drew persuaded Jennifer Aniston to break up with him, saying that it was better to be quick and painful. After a series of arguments, Jennifer Aniston became rebellious. Jennifer Aniston swore in public that she would never let Drew off so easily. When Eric saw Jennifer Aniston swearing, he was secretly happy. But Jennifer Aniston didn't stay in the villa. Instead, she rented an apartment in Burbank. Although she didn't mention anything about breaking up, she had a cold war with Eric. Then the filming of Dark War started. Eric was so busy that he didn't have time to coax the girl. He could only make a few harassment calls to Jennifer Aniston every day to announce his presence. Hearing Eric's explanation, Virginia blushed. "You should spend more time with her. She'll be fine if you coax her more. You don't have to be so strong all the time." "Okay, let's not talk about this headache for now. Aren't you going to the UK the day after tomorrow? I have to come and see you. I've talked to Jonathan. As long as Scary Island is completed before September, it won't affect the Venice Film Festival. So he will strive for perfection during filming. You'll probably stay in the UK for a long time." Virginia took a sip of coffee and blinked. "Will you come to the set to see Visit?" Eric shook his head. "I'm not sure. Dark War will be released in July. If the filming goes well, I'll go to the UK in mid-May. If it doesn't go well, I probably won't be able to go." "Oh." Virginia nodded non-committally. After chatting for a while, Eric patted his stomach. "Vicky, I'm hungry." The woman quickly stood up. "What do you want to eat? Can I drive to the supermarket?" Eric stopped the woman. "Don't bother. Just make something." "Okay, there's spaghetti at home," the woman said and walked to the kitchen. After Virginia busied herself in the kitchen with an apron, Eric got up and walked to the second floor. When he came to the balcony, the sun had completely set and the sky was getting dark. Eric leaned on the balcony railing and looked at the tip of Malibu not far away. Because of the sky, he could only see a dim outline. The construction had already started and was expected to be completed by the end of the year. In addition to the supermansion with a sea view and Iron Man, several other villas would be built on the more than 1-hectare estate to entertain guests or hold banquets. Eric had seen the complete design draft of the entire manor. As the other villas were located on a flat terrain, their cost was far lower than that of the mansions with a sea view. However, in the design draft provided by Frank Gehry, the few buildings were naturally integrated together. Together with the green belt, tennis court, parking apron and other facilities in the manor, it gave off a natural feeling. Of course, correspondingly, the cost of the entire estate was more than $20 million. Anyway, there was a professional accounting firm to supervise the financial situation of the project. Since they had decided to build an ideal luxury estate, as long as the other party did not embezzle the construction funds or other tricks, they could be as extravagant as they wanted. After all, the purpose of making money was to spend it. After dinner, although Eric was very tired, He patiently accompanied the woman on the sofa to watch soap operas for a while. Eric, I heard that Firefly is planning to film a TV series? Yeah, Eric said. Oh right, this is a sitcom. In the future, many big stars will be needed to make cameo appearances. Do you want to come? Virginia nodded gently and said, If you want me to go, I'll go. Eric said, Jenny is one of the main characters. Virginia laughed. Then I'll go too. You're in charge of coordinating everything. Anyway, it's all your fault. I want to see if you'll do anything if your girlfriend can't help but bully me in public. I don't care, Eric said with a smile. According to the ancient traditions of the East, your identity is that of a servant girl. It's natural for you to be bullied by the wife. Of course, if you have the ability to turn the tables on the servant girl, I would be happy to see it happen. Although Virginia did not understand what a servant girl was, it did not prevent her from understanding the meaning of Eric's words. She gently bit Eric's arm, leaving a series of faint teeth marks. You're really a bastard. Eric got up at 7 o'clock the next day, feeling refreshed. He hurriedly ate breakfast and asked Virginia to drive him to the set. Although it had been a night, Cruz and Hanks quickly found their groove after they started filming the scenes that they did not finish yesterday. The remaining scenes were all completed in half an hour. Joe Pacey, who heard the bad news that he had missed out on Home Alone yesterday, also made a dazzling appearance. When he heard that Sean had let Andy go, he shook his head excitedly, almost like the image in his memory. Moreover, Joe Pacey's voice was more hilarious than Huang Chifa's in the original version. The crew members on the scene could not help but laugh. Hanks also clearly expressed his worry that he might be overshadowed. For the next period of time, the filming of Dark War was still slowly progressing according to plan. A few days later, the crew of Shock Island set off for the UK. Except for the actors, the crew of Shock Island was basically established by Jonathan Demme alone. Eric did not intervene. After all, Jonathan Demme had been in Hollywood for more than 10 years and had more connections in this area than Eric. Eric did not take the time to send them off. Instead, Jeffrey, as one of the producers, followed the crew to the island in the English Channel and stayed with the crew for a few days before returning. In mid-April, Knowing Women by Scent officially started shooting. At the same time, after more than 10 days of filming, Dark War completed all the indoor scenes and began the most difficult outdoor scenes. Although all the scenes were installed in Eric's mind, when it came to the actual shooting, he found that it was not as easy as he imagined. Chapter 137. In the downtown area of Los Angeles, a 500-meter-long street near the Santa Monica Freeway had been sealed off. No external vehicles were allowed to enter. Since 8 o'clock in the morning, a large number of filming equipment had been unloaded from trucks. The nearby residents were used to the film crew's arrival. This was Los Angeles, and there were countless film crews shooting every day. Because this street was not too busy, but it was between high-rise buildings, many film crews would shoot here. But this time, there were obviously more onlookers, not only because the film included two famous stars, Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks, but also because of the director, Eric. Many people had seen living directors before, but a young director who had achieved great success before the age of 19 was rare, so it was not surprising that people were curious about him. There were many paparazzi with cameras in the crowd, hoping to take some valuable photos. Even if they couldn't get some breaking news like an accident, it would be worth waiting for a day if they could get a few close-up shots of the lead actors. Are the extras in place? Next to the 3 yellow taxis, Eric asked his assistant as he watched the film crew install cameras on the front of the taxis. 50 people all here. Royce asked me to ask you, do you want to start preparing? According to the plan, let the extras familiarize themselves with their positions first. We'll shoot some street scenes later. Okay, Alan replied, then said, by the way, the people from the community agency said that we have to open this street for an hour at noon. The reason they gave is that there will be a lot of traffic at that time, so they need to pass through this street. Eric rubbed his forehead in distress. This was purely asking for trouble. It was not the time to get off work at noon. How much more traffic could there be? But he did not want to deal too much with these troublesome agencies. Anyway, the crew needed to eat at noon. Tell them that no problem. We'll stop filming from 12 to 1 o'clock at noon, and let the street out. After Alan left, Eric turned his attention to the taxis. The license plates of the 3 taxis were exactly the same. This was just to prevent these details from appearing in the shot. Once the shooting was completed, the 3 cars would change back to their original license plates. Of the 3 cars, one didn't need any special treatment. The cameraman would shoot from the front passenger seat, while the other 2 had cameras installed on the hood of the front, and the windows on both sides of the back seat. Today, they were going to shoot the scene where Sean tried to drive Andy to the police station for the first time. In the script, this scene was less than 2 minutes long, but according to Eric's calculations, they would have accumulated nearly an hour of footage. Therefore, if they could finish shooting this scene today, it would be considered a success. After all the camera mounts in the taxi were ready, Eric picked up the walkie-talkie and began to give orders to the whole crew. Cruz and Hanks, who had been staying in the trailer, got out of the car at this time. The paparazzi, who had been waiting nearby for a long time, began to press the shutter crazily. The 2 men's costumes were not too special. Cruz was in a black casual suit, while Hanks was dressed like a courier, wearing a cap and a plain white work suit. After a brief reminder from Eric, the 2 men got into the first taxi that was not modified at all. The first scene was to shoot an outdoor scene of the taxi driving on the street. Eric walked behind the wireless monitor and looked at the screen that was less than 7 inches long. After making sure that the light was correct, Eric confirmed with the camera again. Alan, have the onlookers left the shooting area? They've all left. Now in front of the cameras are our actors. Alan's voice sounded from the walkie-talkie, mixed with the sound of electric current. Eric had to confirm again. If a face that did not belong to an actor appeared on the screen after the production was completed in the future, it would be very interesting. American extras were also actors, and they were very expensive. However, Eric still could not film the real people, not to mention whether the real passers-by would cooperate with the camera lens. Even if they did, once the movie was completed in the future and people found that they appeared on the screen, with the character of Americans, they would not have a sense of vanity like, I'm in a movie. They would only contact their own lawyers and sue the film crew on the grounds that their portrait rights were infringed. If they pursued the matter, it would be a light compensation of $1 million or $800,000. In the worst case, the movie might be forced to stop in the middle of its release. Therefore, although Eric had confirmed it here, after the post-production editing was completed, he would organize the personnel to conduct a detailed screening of the identities of the characters that appeared in the shot to ensure that there were no outsiders, who did not belong to the actors in the movie. Therefore, when you saw a Hollywood movie where the protagonist was walking through the streets with people shuttling back and forth, there was no doubt that even if there were hundreds or thousands of pedestrians in the shot, they would definitely be actors. There would not be any real passers-by. After Hanks drove the taxi to familiarize himself with the road several times, Eric gave the order, and the day's tedious shooting officially began. Eric's eyes were fixed on the monitor, watching the performance of the 2 people in the car. Their conversation rang out in his earphones. Although it was not very clear, it was enough to hear clearly. This part would definitely be redubbed in the post-production, but the original sound of the movie also had to be preserved as a reference for the dubbing. It was already afternoon, and Eric couldn't remember how many times he had repeated the shoot. In any case, there were a lot of NGs. At this moment, Eric was standing. The staff deliberately raised the monitor to a position in front of Eric's eyes. Although he felt a little tired, Eric had to continue. Cruz and Hanks had plenty of time to rest. After every hour of shooting, the 2 of them would take a break. In the camera, the 2 of them were still in high spirits, without the slightest hint of fatigue. However, while they were resting, Eric had no choice but to arrange other scenes. He had only agreed to shoot today with the community agency, so he had to accumulate enough material for many scenes, in case something went wrong in the later stages and they had to make up for it. In the camera, Andy slowly pulled down the zipper of his jacket, took out his pistol, and asked casually, "Where are we going?" "The nearest police station." Sean glanced at the rearview mirror and calmly watched Andy slowly screw on the silencer. Andy looked out the window and smiled. "You're alone?" Sean shrugged indifferently. Enough. You don't have a gun. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Shoot me. Sean turned his head and glanced at him. The car will flip over. Yes, it's very dangerous. Andy's relaxed smile did not change at all. He slowly rolled down the window. If you can get me to the police station, you win. A pistol with a silencer stuck out of the window, and Andy pulled the trigger without hesitation. At this point, Eric called for the taxi to stop. The taxi stopped, and Cruz and Hanks got out at the same time. Nickel, who was in the passenger seat, also came out with a camera. After the three of them left the taxi, the crew quickly stepped forward and drove the taxi back to its original position. Many of the prop vehicles on the road also turned around and returned to the starting point in an orderly manner, waiting for the next shoot to begin. Eric told the three of them about the flaws in the shot just now and told them what to pay attention to during the next shoot. After everything was restored to its original position, Cruz and Hanks returned to the taxi, and Nickel, carrying the camera, followed them in again. Soon, another round of filming began. Dark War was a movie without much depth. It was a 72-hour battle between a police officer and a robber. When promoting the movie, they would definitely use phrases such as ups and downs. In the eyes of ordinary audiences, this was indeed the case. But for Eric, compared to the brain-burning blockbusters in his memory, this movie did not require any thinking. It was just a cool commercial film. Therefore, the acting requirements for the two leading actors were not too high. In particular, the outdoor scenes of this movie did not require much acting skills. With Cruz and Hank's abilities, they could easily handle it. From mid-April to mid-May, the crew spent most of their time in the streets and alleys of downtown Los Angeles. Sometimes they stayed on a street for 2 or 3 days, and sometimes they finished all the shots in half a day. All in all, the process could only be described as boring. Jeffrey followed the crew of Island Horror to the UK for a few days, then returned to Los Angeles and quickly flew to the New York crew of Smelling Women. The rest of the Firefly employees, except for the security guards at the company's headquarters, and a few clerks who were in charge of sending and receiving emails, were working with Eric's crew. If the profits from Firefly's movies were ignored, this film company was no different from many small independent film companies in Los Angeles. Although the exterior shooting of Dark War was very tedious, there were not many problems so far. The shooting progress was basically the same as the previously set shooting schedule. It was expected to officially wrap up around May 15th. Columbia had already started a small-scale promotion, and there were scattered news about Dark War in the media from time to time. Columbia's market value had increased to $3.5 billion because of the negotiations with the wealthy Sony. The Japanese could only see Columbia's share prices rising day by day, and they could not do anything about it. This was a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, and it would take at least a year to complete. The media estimated that even if all the negotiations were completed, the earliest they could sign the contract was September. Even if the acquisition agreement was signed, the subsequent handover would take a few years. Therefore, the summer box office results were the last opportunity for Columbia to push up their share prices. Warner originally had 2 big productions to release, Batman and Lethal Weapon 2, but because Dark Warfare was scheduled to be released on July 7th, Warner had to postpone Lethal Weapon 2, which was originally scheduled to be released in July, to the end of the year. The first Lethal Weapon grossed more than $60 million in 1987, and it was considered a hit. This year, the cost of the second Lethal Weapon doubled. To recoup the cost, the box office sales had to reach at least $100 million. Under such pressure, the Warner executives did not want to compete with Dark War, which had 3 big names: Eric, Cruz, and Hanks. They took the initiative to postpone the release to the end of the year. As a result, Columbia became the only movie giant with 2 blockbuster releases scheduled for the summer. The other blockbuster was Ghostbusters 2, which was also a sequel that movie fans had been looking forward to for a long time. The first Ghostbusters was released in 1984, which was 5 years ago. As for why Columbia suddenly started this project at the beginning of this year, the filming progress was almost the same as Dark War. Their purpose was self-evident. After all, Columbia only had one movie series that was good enough to show off. Eric, do you need to recruit more people? In late April, Jeffrey returned to Los Angeles after completing his inspection of the 2 film sets. They met for the first time in half a month at Firefly's conference room. The time was 8 p.m. During the day, Eric did not have time to come to the office. At this time, Eric was looking at the documents for Smell the Scent and Island Horror that Jeffrey had brought back. Without looking up, he said, "No need. After Smell the Scent of a Woman and Island Horror are completed, I will ask Jonathan and Martin to recommend some crew members to join Firefly." "Well then, what about the TV series? You mentioned that Friends, time is getting tight. The executives of Fox also contacted me, hoping that you can provide the script. They are willing to help with the pre-production." Eric smiled. He had already made it clear to Barry Diller that Friends would be produced independently by Firefly. Fox still did not give up the idea of getting involved. This was understandable. After all, this was a sitcom. The production cost was very low. If they could co-own the copyright with Firefly, and if the TV series was successful, Fox could prevent Eric from using it as a bargaining chip. Even if it failed, it would only be a few $1 million of investment, which was nothing to Fox. Reject them. You see, they came to you instead of me. This means that Fox knows my character. Jeffrey hesitated for a moment and said, "Eric, you are not doing well." Eric finally looked up. You are too independent in everything you do. You don't allow others to interfere with your movies, and you also don't allow TV series. This will not work in Hollywood. Many low-budget movies nowadays will attract many investors to share the risks and profits. This is the orthodox survival rule of Hollywood. Even among the 6 major movie companies, although the competition is fierce, there are still cross-shareholdings among each other. I understand what you are trying to say. Eric scratched his head. It's just maybe now is not the time. I will definitely share it with others in the future. While I can still enjoy it alone, I will share it with them a few more times. When others can't take it anymore, I will share some with them. Jeffrey showed a helpless expression. Well, when will we start preparing for Friends? Starting tomorrow, Eric said. I called you here today to discuss this matter. We have to start this project as soon as possible. I plan to add a few scenes from Friends into Dark War. Adding scenes from Dark War to Friends? Eric, are you talking about TIG advertisements? Even if Columbia agrees, it is not worth it. It might even cause the audience to dislike it. It's not a patch commercial, Eric denied, and explained to Jeffrey in detail what the shots were for. This is a good idea. Jeffrey nodded, then questioned. But it is less than 2 months, and you promised Fox that you would personally direct the first 2 episodes. Do you think you can complete it? Eric shook his head. No, I don't need to complete the shooting of any episode. All the ideas are in my head. We just need to confirm the characters as soon as possible, complete the set, and then shoot a few interesting scenes. Jeffrey felt that this plan was very feasible. Moreover, he could also see that if the plan was successful, it would have an unexpected publicity effect for Friends. But Eric, I have no experience in TV series production. Maybe you need an experienced TV series producer. I said I won't let Fox intervene in this matter. Eric spread his hands. So Jeffrey, you have to work a little harder. Jeffrey showed a somewhat ambiguous smile with a hint of ridicule. Actually, among the people you know, there is one who has been a TV series producer. Eric's thoughts turned. Soon, the pretty face of the stubborn girl in John Aniston, whom he had met a few times, appeared in his mind. John should be from NBC, and his main focus is on acting. Eric's first reaction was to resist. Father-in-law and son-in-law, these 2 creatures were naturally repellent. Jeffrey said, but he has more experience than me. I don't know anything about TV series production. If there is enough time, I can slowly explore it. But you are so tight on time, so... Eric rubbed the document in front of him a few times and nodded slightly. Then I will try to contact him as soon as possible. If it doesn't work, I still need you to do it. Jeffrey nodded. Then about the actors? Jenny's role has been confirmed, Eric said. We still need 5 more roles. I will go back tonight and write down the requirements for the roles. I will give it to you tomorrow. Start the casting as soon as possible. This time, the scope shouldn't be too big. Otherwise, it will be too troublesome to interview. At the very least, we need actors with acting experience. I think there won't be as many people who are willing to sign up as compared to the previous movies. There won't be many to begin with, Jeffrey said with a smile. TV series are not as attractive as movies. After discussing things until 9 p.m., Eric left Firefly's office building. If he wanted to invite John Aniston to be the producer, it would be best to go through Jennifer Aniston. So Eric drove to Jennifer Aniston's residence. When he arrived at the door of Jennifer Aniston's apartment, Eric did not knock on the door. As usual, he took out the spare key from the flower pot next to the door. But after turning the key a few times in the keyhole, he found that it was locked from the inside. It can't be because of me, right? Eric thought with a wry smile. He put the key back into the flower pot and knocked on the door. Who is it? The girl answered faintly. A moment later, the door opened a crack. Eric was about to push the door open when he found that there was a security chain in the crack. This thing was definitely newly installed. Look at the chain, it was shiny. This is definitely because of me. Eric thought so in his heart, but his body was leaning against the door frame in a posture that he thought was cool. He stared at Jennifer Aniston and asked in a very playful tone, "Girl, the night is long and you can't sleep. Do you need a strong man to comfort your lonely little soul? Get lost." Jennifer Aniston glared at Eric and slammed the door shut. Chapter 138. After Eric was given the cold shoulder, Jennifer Aniston leaned against the door triumphantly, waiting for him to knock again. At the same time, she thought about how she should mock him. Yes, she couldn't be nice to him tonight. As for whether she would let him stay or not, that would depend on his performance. Jennifer Aniston waited for 2 or 3 minutes, but there was no movement outside the door. Humph, he's definitely up to something. Don't think I'll fall for it. Although she was mumbling to herself, Jennifer Aniston couldn't help but look through the peephole. The voice-activated lights in the hallway had been turned off, and it was pitch black outside. Damn it, he must be hiding in the dark, waiting for her to open the door. Although Jennifer Aniston had this thought, she gradually became uneasy. Finally, after waiting for 5 minutes, Jennifer Aniston couldn't help but open the door a crack and look outside. At the same time, she stomped her foot to turn on the voice-activated lights in the hallway. But with the security chain in the way, Jennifer Aniston could only see a narrow line of sight. There was nothing in the empty hallway, and it was so quiet that it was disturbing. Unplugging the pin of the security chain, Jennifer Aniston opened the door and walked out. A familiar voice laughed from the right side of the door, and a pair of big hands attacked. Then Jennifer Aniston floated up. Ah! Although she realized who had attacked her, Jennifer Aniston still screamed and struggled on Eric's shoulder. "You bastard, save me." Eric hugged the girl tightly and walked into the apartment. He turned around and closed the door. Slap! Feeling the pain, Jennifer Aniston was ashamed and angry. She struggled even harder. "It hurts, you bastard, put me down." Another slap, much lighter than before. At the same time, Eric's voice rang out. "Baby, stop screaming. The neighbors will call the police if you continue." Jennifer Aniston hammered Eric's back a few times. "Who let you in? You're trespassing." "Wow, what a big crime. You won't shoot me, will you?" Eric laughed as he put Jennifer Aniston on the sofa in the living room. Once Jennifer Aniston was free, she immediately picked up a pillow and sat cross-legged on the sofa, glaring at Eric. Eric walked to the fridge, opened the door and took a look inside. Smiling, he took out a can of beer and waved it at Jennifer Aniston. Jennifer Aniston immediately turned her head away proudly and defended herself. I didn't prepare it for you. I bought it for myself." TSK. Eric sat down on the sofa opposite Jennifer Aniston, pulled open the tab, and took a few sips. He smacked his lips and said, Love beer tastes really good." The beer is finished. You can leave now. I still want to sleep." Just as she said that, there was a knock on the door. A man's voice came from outside the door. Miss Jennifer Aniston, are you okay? The two people in the house were stunned. Jennifer Aniston was the first to react. Sorry to disturb the neighbors. You're the one who's shouting, aren't you? Eric retorted. That's also your fault. Jennifer Aniston stood up and walked to the door. Eric followed. When he opened the door, a middle-aged man and woman were standing outside. The man was holding a baseball bat, and the woman was holding a double-barreled shotgun. The two of them stood at the door cautiously. When they saw that Jennifer Aniston was safe and sound, they relaxed a little. Miss Jennifer Aniston, we heard you shouting for help. The middle-aged man looked at the tall Eric behind Jennifer Aniston with a vigilant look in his eyes. Jennifer Aniston smiled and opened the door. She hugged Eric's arm and made an intimate gesture. She explained, Sorry, Mr. Bateman. I'm sorry to disturb you. My boyfriend was just joking with me and gave me a fright. Hello, Mr. Bateman. My name is Eric. I'm sorry to disturb you. Eric took the initiative to reach out and shook hands with the two of them. It's okay. Mr. Bateman shook hands with Eric and chatted for a while. He rejected Jennifer Aniston and Eric's invitation to have a cup of coffee and left with his wife. When the door closed, Jennifer Aniston immediately let go of Eric's arm and returned to the sofa. Eric sat beside Jennifer Aniston and hugged the girl. Jennifer Aniston resisted twice and leaned on Eric's shoulder. Jenny, have you been in contact with your father recently? The girl raised her head slightly. Yes. Why are you asking this? What has John been doing recently? Eric did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked another question. I'm not sure about that. Jennifer Aniston counted on her fingers and said, I only know that he has been acting in Days of Our Lives for the past few years. Then, can you help me ask your father if he's interested in being a producer for a TV series? Jennifer Aniston was a little confused. A TV series? It's the TV series we discussed before. The one you have a role in. Eric explained to Jennifer Aniston in detail. You mean let my father be a producer for Friends? Eric nodded. Jeffrey isn't good at this, and we couldn't find anyone we could trust for the time being. Also, I don't want Fox to interfere with this TV series, so I thought of your father. Jennifer Aniston was suddenly unhappy. So this guy didn't come here specifically to look for her. That's despicable. She broke free from Eric's embrace and asked unhappily, You came here tonight, just for this? Eric quickly hugged Jennifer Aniston. Of course not, I missed you so I came here. Then, without waiting for Jennifer Aniston to react, Eric kissed the girl's red lips. After the kiss, Eric looked at the dazed Jennifer Aniston and smiled. This smile looked particularly evil to Jennifer Aniston, so she couldn't help but reach out and pinch Eric's leg. Ah, you're so ruthless. Watch how I deal with you. Chapter 139. After John Aniston received Eric's invitation, he agreed almost immediately. Between a soap opera actor and a TV series producer, not many people would be willing to choose the former. In Hollywood, whether it was screenwriters, actors, or directors, once their career progressed to a certain extent, they would all choose to become producers. Because of this, John Aniston even resigned from some of his positions at NBC, and at the same time, reduced his screen time on Days of Our Lives. Even though he was already in his 50s, the same age as Jeffrey, his ambition was not any weaker than when he was younger. Even though they did not recoup any of the box office profits from Home Alone and Pretty Woman, due to Eric's two huge loans, Firefly was not short of money. The budget for each episode of the TV series was about US $200,000, and the total investment after production was completed was only US $5 million, which was equivalent to the investment for Scary Island. With the addition of John Aniston, the Friends project quickly started in early May. The crew rented two huge studios at 20th Century Fox to set up all the scenes for Friends. In his previous life, Friends was basically filmed at Warner Studios in Los Angeles. Even though Eric did not want Fox to participate in the TV series, if they had to look for Warner or Columbia to rent a studio, it would seem too deliberate. During a meeting, Eric did suggest building a studio for Friends, but Jeffrey and John jointly objected. The two of them agreed that it would cost too much. and the gains would not make up for the losses. Eric could only give up on the idea for the time being. As for the actors, Eric also fantasized that it would be perfect if he could gather all 6 actors from his previous life. Friends was released 5 years earlier than in his previous life, so according to the timeline, the oldest of the main cast, Lisa Kudrow, was only 26 years old, and the rest were between 20 and 24 years old. If they started acting at this time, then 10 years later, the actors would not show any obvious signs of age on screen. In his previous life, the reason Friends ended in the 10th season was partly because of the actors' salaries, but the most important reason was that the actors' ages were no longer suitable for the series to continue. Lisa Kudrow, who played Phoebe in the 10th season, was already 41 years old, and had already started playing the role of a mother on the big screen. It would be inappropriate for her to act cute and funny like a young person in the movie. Of course, gathering all 6 actors from his previous life was destined to only be a dream. Matthew Perry, who had been introduced by Jennifer Aniston to play the young and clumsy thief in Home Alone, was now an A-list movie actor. Asking an A-list Hollywood superstar to act in a sitcom was simply a pipe dream. As for the other actors, Eric did have some of their movies stored in his memory, but before this year, Eric could only remember that Courtney Cox had played a small role in The Magic Cocoon. There was not even a shadow of the others, and it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack to find them. Under such circumstances, Eric could only patiently start to choose the replacements for the other 5 friends. On Sunday, May 10th, the filming of Dark War was coming to an end. As long as there were no major accidents during the next working day, the filming would be completed smoothly. Therefore, Eric was able to take time out today to conduct the final audition for the actors of Friends. This was also the last round of screening. Because of Eric's previous request, the first thing the crew did was to audition the actors. Therefore, it only took 10 days. The set in the rented Fox studios was still in the early stages of construction, and the screening of the actors had already entered the final round of screening. Eric's plan was to shoot a few classic scenes of Friends during the post-production process of Dark War, from mid-May to mid-June to add them to the movie. The official filming of the TV series would have to wait until Dark War was released in July. According to Fox's plan, the TV series would be released in early September, which would coincide with the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall of the American TV series. Moreover, Eric estimated that he would only be able to spend 2 weeks shooting the first 2 episodes of the TV series. After that, he would have to work nonstop on the preparation work for the 2 movies in the second half of the year. He also had to worry about the release of the other 3 movies. Basically, he wouldn't have any free time in the second half of the year. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Eric walked into the company and saw many men and women waiting in the corridor. These people obviously knew Eric. After Eric appeared, they took the initiative to greet Eric. A few young girls even threw meaningful glances at Eric. Eric nodded at the crowd and walked into the audition room. He hadn't seen the list of actors for the last round. Also, because none of the actors had a clue, Eric had to do the interview himself. He couldn't just draw a circle like he did when he was casting for Scary Island and knowing women by smelling fragrance. Jeffrey John, good morning. When he walked into the audition room, he saw that Jeffrey and John Aniston were already there. The 2 of them were whispering something. When they saw Eric, they stood up and greeted Eric. Good morning, Eric. Good morning, Eric. Eric walked to the back of the long table and sat down. A blonde female assistant took the initiative to approach Eric and put a stack of documents in front of Eric. Mr. Williams, this is the list of actors for today's audition. The order has been marked on it. The crew of Friends was formed by his own contacts in the television industry. The blonde was also a relatively experienced staff member he found. Now that the blonde was seducing his daughter's boyfriend in front of him, how could John Aniston be happy? Eric guessed that the blonde would not stay on the set for long. However, perhaps the blonde did not know much about the relationship between John Aniston and Eric, or perhaps she knew but did not take it to heart. Therefore, she seduced Eric in front of Eric. With Eric's identity as a billionaire at a young age, any slightly ambitious woman in Hollywood would throw herself at him. This was not the first time Eric had encountered this kind of seduction. Okay, I understand. After the blonde finished her introduction, Eric nodded lightly. Then, my name is Linda Grant. Mr. Williams, you can call me Linda. The blonde straightened her back and intentionally or unintentionally showed off her wonderful figure wrapped in a professional suit. Thank you, Miss Linda. Eric smiled at the blonde and thanked her. John Aniston's voice finally sounded. Linda, let the young people waiting outside get ready. We'll start right away. Okay, Mr. Jennifer Aniston. The blonde nodded and walked out of the audition room. Ahem, Eric, Linda is married. Her husband is a sound recordist. For some reason, John Aniston whispered this in Eric's ear when the blonde left. Eric shrugged innocently. John, I didn't do anything. Eric, although it's inevitable to act in Hollywood, you'd better be careful not to hurt Jenny. She's actually still a very innocent little girl. Eric nodded guiltily. Don't worry, John, I'll be careful. John Aniston shook his head. Actually, I hope you can take the initiative to break up with Jenny. Eric immediately refused. Unless Jenny takes the initiative to leave me, I won't break up with Jenny. After Eric said this, he secretly added in his heart. Even if she wants to leave me, I'll find a way to get her back. Of course, he couldn't say this out loud, otherwise John Aniston might do something. John Aniston obviously couldn't guess what Eric was thinking. He patted him on the shoulder and started the audition. Only then did Eric have the chance to look down at the list of auditionees. Sure enough, at a glance, there weren't any famous movie stars. Eric didn't watch many American TV series in his previous life, so it was reasonable that he didn't know the people in the American TV series circle. After all, there were very few young people in their 20s who could make a name for themselves. By the time American TV series became more and more sophisticated and could even challenge the status of movies, these people would already be in their 30s and 40s. Even if they appeared in American TV series, they would be unremarkable supporting roles. After flipping through several long pages of the audition list, he couldn't find a single familiar name. Bored to death, he flipped to the last page. This page was the list of actresses who had applied for the role of Phoebe Buffy. Eric finally found a familiar name, and it was the kind that he was very familiar with, Nicole Kidman. This made Eric a little surprised. Why would Nicole Kidman apply for a TV series? Eric carefully checked the spelling to make sure it was the correct name. So he waved at Linda Grant, who walked in again. The blonde immediately came up to him. Mr. Williams, what's the matter? Where is the detailed information of the actors? I want to see the information of the audition this afternoon. Please wait a moment. Linda responded and walked out. A moment later, she came back with a few folders. Mr. Williams, it's all here. Thank you, just call me Eric. Eric thanked her. Ignoring the curious eyes of Jeffrey and John Aniston next to him, he began to search. Soon he found Nicole Kidman's file. With just a glance, Eric recognized the woman in the photo posted on the file. She had brown wavy hair, a round face, blue glasses, and thin lips. After a quick glance, the woman's resume stopped at an Australian TV series called No Sin Alive. She had also acted in several TV series and movies before. In other words, crossing the horizon, which made Nicole Kidman enter Hollywood, was no longer there. Was this also the butterfly effect he had brought? Eric rubbed the edge of the paper and thought about it. In the end, he had to admit that this must be the case. Ever since he published Jurassic Park last year and entered Hollywood through Back to 17, everything in the world had changed. This reminded Eric of the dominoes he had seen in his previous life. As long as the first domino was pushed, it would cause thousands of dominoes to fall. This was the most vivid interpretation of the butterfly effect. According to the timeline in his memory, Nicole Kidman should have acted in Crossing the Horizon before coming to Hollywood. Then, she quickly hooked up with Tom Cruise through Thunder High. She ruined Cruise's original family and became Mrs. Cruise. From then on, she went from an unknown vase actress to a top vase in Hollywood. More than 10 years later, she even won an Oscar for Best Actress. Thinking of this trivial information, Eric could only conclude that this woman was very impressive. Among all of Cruise's women, she was the only one who had the best career. Even after she divorced Cruise, Her career was not affected. Instead, it went to a higher level. Soon, she entered the 20 million pay club and successfully won an Oscar for Best Actress. As for Cruise's first wife, she did not leave any impression at all. His last wife, Katie Holmes, did not get any benefits from Cruise either. After the divorce, because of her identity as Mrs. Cruise, no man was willing or dared to go on a date with her. During the interview in the morning, Eric became more and more interested in this woman. During the lunch break, Eric winked at the female assistant who had been trying to seduce him, and went to the stairwell at the end of the corridor. "Eric, what's the matter?" Linda looked at Eric curiously and nervously. She felt that she was not prepared. Was this little director going to do something here? "It's like this, Linda." Eric took out a page of information. "This is Miss Nicole Kidman. After her interview in the afternoon, take her to my office and ask her to wait for me there. I want to talk to her alone." Linda took the information and looked at Nicole Kidman's photo. She found that this woman was far more beautiful than her. She was a little disappointed, but still nodded. "Okay, Eric. I'll tell her. Do you have anything else?" Eric shook his head honestly. "No." "Oh." Linda lowered her head. The tips of her high heels rubbed against the cement floor a few times. Just when she had the courage to look up and say something, she found that there was no one in front of her. This unromantic little guy is really too infuriating. The woman stomped her feet, turned around and walked back in disappointment. After an afternoon of auditions, the remaining 5 roles had been preliminarily confirmed. Eric also met Nicole Kidman, who was auditioning at around 4 in the afternoon. There was no problem with the woman's performance, but compared to the image of Lisa Kudrow in his memory, Nicole Kidman was too beautiful. Monica Geller's role had already been confirmed as a black-haired beauty, who was somewhat similar to Courtney Cox. If Phoebe Buffay chose another beauty, the sitcom would definitely be a little distorted. Therefore, Eric, John, and the others basically unanimously did not consider Nicole Kidman. Instead, they chose another girl with a more ordinary appearance. The auditions ended at 5 o'clock. Eric, John Aniston, and the others had been discussing the shooting plan of Friends in the conference room until 7 o'clock in the evening. Everyone left. Eric's mind was in a mess, and he almost forgot about what he had told the female assistant. When he walked out of the office building, he remembered and hurriedly turned back. Now that the sky was completely dark, Eric was not sure if Nicole Kidman would leave early, but it was unlikely. With this woman's intelligence, it was impossible for her to leave early. Even if Eric did not appear tonight, this woman would patiently wait in his office. When he opened the office door, he saw a woman sitting on the sofa. Only the desk lamp on the desk was turned on in the office, so it was very dark. Eric recognized her at a glance. When she saw Eric open the door and enter, the woman stood up. Eric closed the door, turned on the office light and said, "Hello, Miss Kidman." "Hello, Mr. Williams." There was no trace of impatience on the woman's face. With a faint smile, she took 2 steps forward and took the initiative to shake Eric's hand. Eric inadvertently glanced at the woman and found that she was barefooted, and her high heels were on the side. What a meticulous woman. She could even notice such a small detail like his height. Eric was only a little over 1.8 meters tall, and Nicole Kidman was about the same height. Perhaps the girl felt that if she wore high heels and was taller than Eric, it might make him unhappy, which was why she did this. Eric sighed in his heart and returned to his seat. "Sorry, Miss Kidman. I've kept you waiting. I've been in a meeting." "It's okay, Mr. Williams. You can call me Nicole." "Okay, Nicole. Likewise, you can call me Eric." As Eric spoke, he leaned back in the leather chair and stopped talking. He carefully looked at the woman in front of him. Nicole Kidman was not in a hurry to ask Eric why he had made her wait. Perhaps she felt that there was no need to ask. This kind of thing was obvious, wasn't it? Chapter 140. In the brightly lit office, Eric admired Nicole's beautiful face for a while. His eyes gradually lost focus, and he couldn't help but think of the divorce case in his previous life. It should have happened in 2001. Although Eric didn't pay much attention to entertainment gossip at that time, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were too famous, and he was in that circle. It was impossible for him not to hear the gossip around him. But until the two officially divorced, the specific reason for the divorce was not exposed, and all kinds of speculations were flying around. Among the several speculations that Eric heard, the most interesting one was that the divorce was because of Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Kubrick made Nicole Kidman fight real soldiers with the male model Gary Cuba, who played a naval officer in the movie. It seemed that in the end, Nicole Kidman had an ovarian operation, and the relationship between the two was irreconcilable. With Kubrick's personality, Eric felt that this was very likely. Kubrick was indeed a bastard, but he wasn't crazy. It was impossible for him to reveal this to Tom Cruise. The news was also released after the divorce. 2 years before the divorce, a maid in the Cruise family accidentally leaked a piece of news to the media, saying that the atmosphere between the Cruise couple at home was cold, and they didn't even talk to each other. The maid was sued because of this news. After the Cruise couple won the lawsuit, they publicly displayed their affection for each other several times in order to protect their image. But 2 years later, the couple inexplicably divorced. At that time, the media listed a series of reasons for the divorce. The first one was that Nicole Kidman had cheated on Cruise, and that the child she was pregnant for 3 months wasn't Tom Cruise's. Eric personally felt that this news was the most reliable, because Nicole Kidman left the marriage with almost nothing. If it wasn't because she was in the wrong, with the character of a Western woman, how could she be satisfied without getting half of Tom Cruise's assets? She wouldn't have agreed to sign the divorce agreement a few days before the 10th anniversary of their marriage. Back then, George Lucas's wife got half of his huge assets because of the divorce, and he sold Pixar Studios because of it. Later, the chairman of the media giant Viacom, Summer Redstone, was in a terrible state because his wife wanted to divorce him. According to California law, if there was no prenuptial agreement, and the couple had been married for more than 10 years, all their assets would be equally divided when they divorced. In 2001, Tom Cruise was reported to have a huge fortune of more than $360 million, and after Nicole Kidman got divorced, it was said that she only took away one piece of art. At this moment in the office, Nicole Kidman noticed that Eric's expression was too absent-minded, and she finally felt a little dissatisfied. Was she so unattractive that this man, who was a few years younger than her, was absent-minded? The office was silent for a few minutes, and Nicole Kidman finally couldn't help but speak first. Eric. Yes, oh sorry Nicole, I suddenly remembered something. Eric finally came back to his senses, smiled at Nicole Kidman apologetically, and asked, Nicole, according to the file, you're doing well in Australia. Why did you suddenly come to Hollywood? All actors in the world yearn to go to Hollywood to prove themselves, and I'm no exception. I hope that I can get a better development in Hollywood. That's not easy. You haven't even acted in a Hollywood movie before, and if you want to prove yourself in Hollywood, you shouldn't have come to audition for a role in a TV series. It's just that I haven't met the right role. Nicole Kidman guiltily found an excuse. I think this TV series should be good, so I came to try. How could Nicole Kidman not want to act in a movie? But in this time and space, she was not as lucky as in her previous life. She came to Hollywood at the beginning of the year, and like all smug actors, she came to the world's film center with all kinds of unrealistic fantasies. In the end, after a few months, she had participated in a lot of auditions, but only got a small supporting role in one movie. In the end, she had to turn her eyes to TV series. Developing from the small screen to the big screen was also the road to fame for many Hollywood stars. Eric suddenly thought of something and asked curiously, Nicole, did you come to Hollywood alone? Yeah, Nicole Kidman said, feeling a little confused. Eric nodded noncommittally. The office was silent for a few seconds, and Nicole Kidman couldn't help but ask the question she was most concerned about. So, Mr. Director, did I get the role of Phoebe Buffy? Sorry, no, the role has been decided for someone else. Eric shook his head and answered honestly. Nicole Kidman was stunned for a moment. What was going on? If the other party had said something like, I'm still thinking about it, or it depends on your performance, Nicole Kidman would have understood what to do. She did not expect the other party to directly tell her that the role had been given to someone else. Can you tell me why? Nicole Kidman's thoughts were a little chaotic. Eric changed into a more comfortable position and explained, I decided unanimously with several other producers because you're too beautiful. Ha. Nicole Kidman was a little speechless. It's like this. Eric sat up straight and explained. In the setting of the story, Phoebe is a girl with a very rough life. She was abandoned by her biological parents when she was young, and later her stepmother committed suicide. The 14-year-old girl wandered alone to New York, struggled at the bottom, and finally became a masseuse. What does this have to do with appearance? It has a lot to do with it. Eric continued. Do you think that if a very beautiful 14-year-old girl wandered the streets of New York, she would peacefully grow into her 20s, live an ordinary life, and make a lot of good friends? Of course not. Although Nicole Kidman came from a well-off middle-class family, it wasn't as if she had never seen the dark side of society. If Phoebe was very beautiful, and if she was lucky, she could find a good man to marry and become a housewife. After all, beautiful women were a scarce resource everywhere. But if she was very unlucky, she would end up very miserable. Eric, if that's the case, then why did you ask me to wait for you here? Because I'm curious. I'm very curious about you, so I wanted to talk to you. That's it. The girl looked at Eric in disbelief. This reason was too far-fetched. Eric shrugged, stood up, and said, That's it. I just wanted to talk to you. It's very late, Nicole. I'm sorry to have made you wait for so long. Let me treat you to dinner. Okay. Nicole Kidman stood up disappointedly, put on her high heels, and walked out of the office with Eric side by side. They went downstairs together under the playful gaze of the security guard who stayed behind. When they were eating in an attached restaurant, the tall girl looked like she had a lot on her mind, as if she was struggling with something in her heart. Eric, on the other hand, ate a lot with relish and chatted with the girl as if nothing had happened. After dinner, they walked out of the restaurant and Eric got into his car. Nicole Kidman saw that Eric was about to say goodbye to her. Finally, she could not help but open the door of Eric's car and sit in the passenger seat. The girl knew very well that if she missed this opportunity, she would probably have to return to Australia with her tail between her legs. In the few months that she had been in Hollywood, Nicole Kidman had seen a lot of the cruel competition in Hollywood. The highest status person she had dealt with was only an independent film director, who was not famous in Hollywood. Although her performance had won several small awards in Australia, it did not matter at all in Hollywood. Nicole. Eric looked curiously at the girl who got into his car. Her own car was parked next to him. Okay, Mr. Williams, what do I have to do to get the role? Please tell me directly, okay? After saying this, the girl's breathing became a little rapid. Her pair of blue eyes stared seriously at Eric, with an imposing manner of going all out. But that role has already been decided, Eric replied seriously. Then why did you do these unnecessary things? Giving people hope, and then crushing it so quickly, don't you think this is too much? Okay, I apologize. I really just did it because I was curious. Then I let a woman wait in the office for a few hours, and talked about a few random things. This is ridiculous. Do you think anyone will believe it? Then what else do you want? Eric was also a little impatient. The girl hesitated for a moment, then reached out and grabbed Eric's arm and pressed it on her thigh. Mr. Williams, I know your situation very well. You are the young director with the most potential in Hollywood. I also heard about Julia Roberts, so can you give me a chance? Eric glanced at the girl's hand on his thigh. Although it was separated by trousers, Eric still felt an inexplicable warmth. After Dark War, there is a movie that you can try, like Wind and Moon. It's also a romantic comedy, Eric finally said. The girl's hand on Eric's arm tightened, and an excited expression appeared on her face. You know, I've been quite busy recently. That movie will start shooting at least in July or August, maybe even later. No problem, I can wait, Nicole Kidman said without hesitation. Eric shook his head. It's not like that. I mean, I've been quite busy recently, and I need a servant at home. Ah. Nicole Kidman opened her mouth slightly. Eric's lips curled into a mischievous smile. I'm too busy, and I need someone to prepare 3 meals a day for me. Oh, I'm usually not home at noon, so 2 meals a day will be enough. Also, I don't like hourly cleaners coming to my house to help clean and tidy up my room. If you're willing, you can come over from May to September to make a cameo appearance as a maid. Ah. Nicole Kidman still couldn't wrap her head around it. After thinking for a moment, the girl asked tentatively, Am I Eric the female lead? Eric revealed a triumphant smile. Of course, if you perform well, you'll be like Julia, becoming an A-list actress in one movie. Many actresses in Hollywood might not have such a good opportunity in their entire career. I need to think about it. Nicole Kidman raised her head. Of course, if you've thought it through, contact me as soon as possible. By the way, if you agree, you'll have to stay in my mansion for the next few months. Why? Nicole Kidman was a little scared, and some embarrassing words popped up in her mind. I have an official girlfriend, so I don't want a young and beautiful woman coming in and out of my mansion. Also, you don't want others to know how you got this role after you become famous, right? I understand. Nicole Kidman nodded. The two chatted for a while more before parting ways. When they got home, Eric was still excited about his mischievous idea. He was sure that Nicole Kidman wouldn't reject this proposal, and he even thought that perhaps this system could be used forever. This way, he wouldn't have to hire some unknown hourly cleaners to clean his house, and he wouldn't have to worry about his 3 meals every day. More importantly, what could be more satisfying than having a star-studded celebrity from his previous life as his maid? At the beginning of a new week, the final filming of Dark War began. The bigger scenes had been completed, and the rest were scattered outdoor scenes. 5 days later, on a street in downtown Los Angeles, the crew of Dark War began filming the final scene. Although the crew had worked intensely for a month and a half, they all looked relaxed. On the bus, Sean had a newspaper under his arm and a bucket of popcorn in his hand. He sat down on a seat and caught a glimpse of the girl's sapphire necklace behind him. After hesitating for a moment, Sean couldn't help but turn around and stare at the necklace in front of the girl for a few seconds. When the girl looked alarmed, he said, Sorry, I mistook you for someone else. It's okay, Yo-Yo replied calmly. At the same time, she inadvertently looked out of the window. The necklace is beautiful. Where did you buy it? Sean couldn't help but ask. A friend gave it to me. It's fake and very cheap. When Yo-Yo heard him mention the necklace, she perked up a little. Sean smiled and said, Boyfriend. Yo-Yo shook her head and said, I haven't seen him in a long time. Keep it well, Sean said. He turned around and looked away. Maybe he'll suddenly appear one day. He'll scare you. Yo-Yo smiled expectantly. Perhaps she also felt that the hope was slim, but she still stubbornly rode this bus every day, hoping that Andy would appear again. The bus gradually stopped. At the same time, Eric said, This scene is over. There's one last scene left. Everyone, get ready. Yo-Yo, oh no, Brooke. Next is the scene I asked you to perform in the audition room. Although there are still a few hours left, I still hope you can pass it as soon as possible. Oh, there's a celebration party tonight. I'll do my best, Eric, Brooke replied with a smile. The last scene began. Another day passed, and Yo-Yo still didn't see Andy. She got off the bus in disappointment. Several cameras were shooting Brooke from inside the bus and across the street at the same time. Although she had practiced many times in the audition room, Brooke Xiaoxi still took 4 or 5 NGs to complete the scene. After Eric shouted good with satisfaction, everyone around him applauded. Eric held the loudspeaker and said, I hereby announce that Dark War has officially ended. Clean up the scene immediately. Tonight at the Hilton Hotel, everyone must be present. No one can be missing. Oh, cheers rang out, and many crew members couldn't help but take off their hats and throw them into the air. Eric smiled and explained the matter. Then he walked to an armored escort car next to him. 4 bodyguards in suits stood vigilantly next to the armored car. A middle-aged man in his 40s was putting the sapphire necklace that Brooke used during the filming into a safe. Mr. Derek, thank you for your sponsorship. After the man put the safe with the diamonds into the car, Eric warmly greeted him and shook his hand. You're welcome, Eric. This is a win-win situation. The middle-aged man named Derek politely shook Eric's hand and said, "Then Eric, I have to leave as soon as possible. I feel uneasy if the gemstone stays outside for another minute." "It's okay, I understand," Eric replied with a smile. In addition to a series of sponsorship brands, there was also a very important prop in Dark War, which was the sapphire that the bald monk snatched. It wasn't that no one had mentioned using props before. They only needed to find a blue crystal worth a few $100s. However, after some consideration, Eric still decided to use the real thing. However, he didn't have any connections in this area. After contacting Columbia, Amy Pascal reported, and the other party quickly found a blue diamond worth $10 million. It was said that the gem came from a collector in the United Kingdom. The collector planned to auction the diamond at Christie's this autumn. It just so happened that the senior management of Columbia had a good personal relationship with the collector. After some communication, the collector reluctantly agreed to take the gem. However, the process was not easy. Every time the gem participated in the filming, there were 4 bodyguards next to it who stared at the gem without blinking. They were always within 5 meters of the sapphire. Everyone in the crew was nervous because of these 4 people. Fortunately, there were no problems during the entire filming process. Chapter 141. After a month and a half of high-intensity filming, especially the 1 month of outdoor filming, the actors were better off, but the dozens of crew members were exhausted. Therefore, the celebration after the casting became particularly unrestrained because of the sudden relaxation after a long period of pressure. The party hall was noisy, and from time to time, someone would make a few high-pitched screams. Eric just laughed at this situation. After all, everyone had been suppressed for a month, so it was reasonable for them to lose their composure. Most of the actors of Dark War received invitations to the party, and several of the leading actors also came to the party. However, after seeing the chaotic scene, Cruz, who was self-conscious, only stayed for less than 20 minutes before leaving. Although he was born at the bottom, he had now automatically classified himself as a group of people at the top of the pyramid. Of course, it was impossible for him to fool around with this group of crew members. Some of the older crew members and actors also left one after another. With Eric's mental age, it was true that he could not enjoy this kind of party, but as the director of Dark War, he had to stay. In the whole hall, Eric was the youngest. Although Eric would look very oppressive when he scolded others on set, he still looked like a harmless young man. In addition, the crew members were more familiar with Eric's character and knew that he was a person who could take a joke, so he naturally became the target of everyone's teasing. After being forced to drink a few bottles of beer for various reasons, Eric left the crowd in the name of going to the bathroom at the end of the corridor. When he came out, he didn't know if it was a coincidence or not, but he happened to see Brooke coming out of the bathroom on the opposite side. She was lowering her head and wiping her hands with a tissue. "Hey Brooke," Eric greeted her with a smile. "Did you have a good time?" Brooke smiled sweetly. It was okay, although it was a bit noisy. As the most beautiful woman at the party, Brooke Xiaoxi naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. Brooke Xiaoxi also enjoyed the feeling of being sought after, but Eric's attitude towards her had always been indifferent. Seeing that Eric was about to leave after greeting her, Brooke Xiaoxi hurriedly stuffed the tissue in her hand into the trash can, caught up with him in a few steps, and reached out to pull Eric. "Brooke, what's the matter?" Eric turned around. Brooke hesitated for a moment before saying, I just want to thank you, Eric. Thank you for giving me the role of Yo-Yo." She wasn't being polite at all. Ever since Brooke was revealed to be the female lead of Dark War, many media outlets had talked about how she had been nominated for several Golden Raspberry Awards in a row, implying that it was impossible for her to get the role on her own, and that there must be something going on behind the scenes. However, it was an indisputable fact that Brooke's popularity had soared again. The media's attention on her had rapidly increased, and paparazzi had once again appeared around her when she went out. This kind of situation hadn't happened for many years. The last time it happened was when she was close to Michael Jackson a few years ago. More importantly, this kind of attention could bring her practical economic benefits. During this period, she had already received several advertising endorsement offers. That's nothing, Brooke. Your performance in Dark War was still very good. I believe that after the movie is released, your image will definitely leave a deep impression on the audience. So, Brooke heard Eric's praise, looked at him expectantly, and asked, Eric, will we have a chance to work together again in the future? Eric hesitated for a moment. He didn't expect the girl to ask so bluntly. If he were to tell her the truth, he would definitely not work with her anymore. However, Eric certainly wouldn't say such hurtful words. Brooke, you have to understand that this requires the right opportunity. Brooke Xiaoxi's expression quickly dimmed. Any man who saw Chu Chu's expression would feel sorry for her. She was simply a seductress. Eric looked at the girl's expression, and even felt a faint sense of guilt. After thinking about it, he tried to persuade her. Brooke, I think you should focus on independent movies. First, choose a few good scripts to hone your acting skills. Brooke started acting at the age of 12, and until she got the role of Dark War, she had basically been wandering in the independent film industry for more than 10 years. She had long understood that if she wanted to stand out in the independent film industry, the most important thing was to have excellent acting skills. With her acting skills, she could win some weighty film awards and then enter the mainstream film industry. However, this path was impossible for her because she was too beautiful. Even if she had a little acting skills, they would be covered by her face and devilish figure. Not to mention that she didn't have that kind of acting skills. Even if she returned to the independent film industry, she could only play the role of a vase. There was no way she could stand out. Brooke certainly understood that even if she wanted to play the role of a vase, she should play the role of a vase in a big production. Even a supporting role in a big production would have more influence than the lead role in a small production. Unfortunately, although Brooke was somewhat famous, she was just a beautiful star. She was not enough to attract the interest of the mainstream film industry in Hollywood. There were countless actresses who were both beautiful and good at acting in this industry. Not many big productions dared to invite her, a vase who had been nominated several times by the Golden Raspberry Awards, to take the risk. Eric could be regarded as the first director who dared to take the risk in recent years. Eric, I know my ability. If I return to the independent film industry, I will never be able to stand out. Are you free tomorrow? Maybe I can treat you to a meal to express my gratitude. No need, Brooke, Eric refused. Noticing the embarrassed look on the girl's face, he quickly added, to be honest, after Dark War is released, I believe that with the influence of your role, you will definitely receive many movie offers. As long as you choose the script carefully, even if you only play the role of a vase in a few movies, as long as the movie sells well, you will definitely be able to join the ranks of A-list actresses. So you don't have to pin your hopes on me at all. Brooke was originally very disappointed by Eric's refusal, but after hearing Eric's last few words, she suddenly became enlightened. Although the girl was not very smart, she could still understand these things. If Dark War made her popular, she really didn't have to go back to acting in a small production. In that case, Eric, thank you. Brooke Xiaoxi finally showed a satisfied expression after thinking it through. It was as if the series of disappointed expressions just now had never appeared on her face. After the girl finished speaking, her beautiful eyes blinked twice. She suddenly stepped forward, held Eric's shoulder, and kissed him gently on the corner of his mouth. Seeing Eric's stunned expression because of her sudden sneak attack, the girl showed a bright smile, turned around and walked to the banquet hall. Eric touched the corner of his mouth, shook his head, and walked to the banquet hall with a smile. Eric, you've been gone for so long. Did something happen? Seeing Eric appear, Tom Hanks walked up and handed a glass of champagne to Eric. He then mockingly gestured at Brooke, who was chatting with someone not far away. Eric took a sip of the champagne and showed a smile that said, "You know what I mean." Hanks also showed a smirk. The two of them looked at each other a few times in disgust before Hanks slightly restrained his expression. If he continued to joke, he would be misunderstood. Eric, do you have any ideas for my next movie? I'm waiting. Hanks also stretched out 5 fingers and waved them in front of Eric's eyes, as if reminding him not to forget the promise of the 5 movies that grossed more than 100 million yuan. In the previous agreement, Eric did not count Dark War as one of the 5 movies. The script has been written for a long time, Eric said. After the post-production dubbing of Dark War is completed, you can start preparing. Hanks was also a workaholic, especially in the past few years. He would take on 2 or 3 movies every year. He was definitely considered diligent in the circle of actors. When he heard Eric's words, Hanks also became energetic. Can you tell me the plot first? Let's go over there and talk. Eric pointed to the sofa in the corner. A couple just left from there and walked to the dance floor. Hanks nodded and the 2 of them walked over. This is also a romantic comedy. It's called Sleepless in Seattle. It's a script I came up with when I went to New York. Romantic comedy? Hanks touched his face hesitantly. A few years ago, Hanks was still a little handsome, and it was acceptable for him to act in romantic comedies. But after 30 years old, Hanks was basically not handsome anymore. Eric, do you think my image is suitable for this kind of movie? Don't worry, this is not an ordinary romantic comedy between a young man and a woman, Eric explained. You will play a single father in the movie. Single father? Okay, don't interrupt. Tom, listen to me first, okay? Okay. Hanks raised his hand. Eric then said, the story is like this. After his wife died of an unexpected illness, the infatuated Sam couldn't forget his wife for a long time. So he decided to leave the sad place of Chicago and move to Seattle with his 8-year-old son Jonah. A year later, on Christmas Day, his son Jonah dialed a radio-emotional hotline that was sent to the entire United States. He wanted to find a new wife for his father who still hadn't walked out of the shadow of his wife's death. Coincidentally, this emotional call connected Sam's family with a woman named Annie who was far away in New York. Although Anne was engaged, she was moved by Sam's infatuation and couldn't help but write a letter to Sam. This letter fell into the hands of Sam's son Jonah. Jonah felt that Anne was a good match for his father, so he wrote a letter for his father and agreed that they would meet on the top floor of the Empire State Building in New York on Valentine's Day. Golden Jade League. After listening to Eric's narration, Hanks blurted out. Eric nodded. There will be many scenes in this movie that will pay homage to Golden Jade League. Eric, according to what you said, will the story of this movie be simple? Eric smiled and spread out his hands. Tom, I'm just telling you the story. This is a standard high-concept movie. The story is simple and even a little cliché. This is the main characteristic of high-concept movies. If a movie wants to be a hit, it must first have a simple and clear storyline. The rest depends on the strength of the director and actors. Chapter 142. Well, I understand. So, when will the movie start shooting? I don't know. Eric took a sip of champagne and explained. You see, I have to go through the post-production of Dark Battle. After the movie is released in July, I have to produce a TV series for Fox. Barry Diller asked me to direct the first 2 episodes personally, so I'm not sure when the movie will start shooting. Tom, haven't you already shot 2 movies this year? You can give yourself a break for a while. Being an actor is so tiring. If you can't enjoy life, what's the fun of getting such a high salary? Oh, according to what you said, you have to shoot 4 movies this year. I heard that you are also the producer of 3 other movies. Isn't a madman who makes 7 movies a year hopeless? No, it's not the same. Eric shook his head calmly and repeated, I'm very different from you guys. Hanks couldn't help but roll his eyes and tease. Are you an alien? Yes, my journey is the sea of stars. The 2 laughed together. The party lasted until midnight. Although Eric was forced to drink a few bottles of beer at the beginning, he didn't drink much after that. So he refused the designated driver and drove slowly home. In order to prevent paparazzi, there were no streetlights in front of the mansions of many famous Hollywood celebrities in Beverly Hills. It was the same in front of Eric's house. Therefore, when Eric got out of the car and opened the door, he was startled by the woman's voice next to him. The woman shouted his name, and then appeared in the range of the car's lights. Eric recognized the tall figure. It was Nicole Kidman, whom he hadn't heard from for several days. After Eric proposed the disgusting condition, he temporarily put the matter at the back of his mind. He didn't expect her to suddenly appear here. "Nicole, why are you here?" Eric asked subconsciously. At the same time, he couldn't help but look up and down at Nicole Kidman's outfit. Nicole Kidman was wearing a black slim long trench coat and a pair of black high heels, which accentuated the girl's tall and slender figure. If Eric ignored the fluffy curly hair on her head, which Eric thought was so old-fashioned, she did have some resemblance to the cool and elegant queen from his previous life. The woman couldn't help but take a step back under Eric's gaze. She stuttered. I understand. I'm willing." "Will you do what? Marry me?" Eric couldn't help but tease her. Although the light was weak, Eric still saw the girl's face quickly become rosy, so he stopped teasing her. He took out the key to open the door and said, "Well, come in with me first." Nicole Kidman returned to where she had been and pulled out a small suitcase. She lowered her head and got into Eric's car. After parking the car, Eric brought the woman to the villa. He pointed at the sofa and said, "Nicole, take a seat first." Nicole Kidman placed her suitcase beside the sofa, took off her windbreaker, and hung it on the hanger before sitting down on the sofa. Seeing Eric turn around and walk into the kitchen, the girl's tense body relaxed a little, and she looked around. Although the design of the villa was mainly modern and simple, it was exquisite everywhere. Although Nicole was born in a good middle-class family, she was full of envy for the mansions in Beverly Hills that she had long heard of. Perhaps, if this man's promise was true, she would only need a few years to buy a villa like this in Beverly Hills. Thinking of this, the girl's apprehension lessened a little, and she looked forward to it. Eric quickly walked out of the kitchen with a cup of coffee. Nicole Kidman hurriedly stood up and wanted to go up to him. "Sit down. You are still a guest," Eric said as he pushed a cup of coffee in front of the woman. Nicole Kidman sat down again and picked up the cup of coffee. After feeling the scalding temperature, she put it back on the coffee table. Her slender fingers rubbed her knees a few times before she raised her head and looked at Eric. "Mr. Williams." "Call me Eric." Eric, can you first confirm that?" "I don't want to." The woman twisted her fingers on her knees. Her voice was full of anxiety. She was afraid that she would make the man in front of her unhappy if she appeared too eager, but she also hoped to hear some accurate promises from Eric. The woman didn't want to stay here for a few months, only to be kicked out by the other party with nothing to show for it. As for what Eric said before, Nicole Kidman didn't believe him at all. This was also the reason why she hesitated for several days. However, her desire for fame and fortune made her unable to hold back and take the initiative to come to him. Eric enjoyed the woman's awkward appearance with great interest for a while before he stood up and said, "Wait a moment." With that, he walked towards the stairs. Nicole Kidman stared at Eric's figure until he disappeared around the corner of the stairs. Then, she subconsciously looked at the trench coat hanging on a hanger not far away. Eric soon appeared again. The woman quickly pretended to be calm and took a sip of coffee. Eric came to the sofa and put a few printed documents in front of Nicole Kidman. The top is the script. The bottom two are the actor's contract. After you read and sign, keep one for yourself and give the other to me. Nicole Kidman didn't expect things to be so simple. She excitedly picked up the script at the top and looked at the name, Sleepless in Seattle. As the woman flipped through the pages, Eric explained while holding a cup of coffee, "The male lead for this movie has already been decided. It's Tom Hanks. If you pay attention to the entertainment news, you should know who Hanks is. The female lead could have been given to Julia Roberts, but in the plan, she also has a movie coming out at the end of the year. Also, Wind and Moon is too influential, so it's not suitable for her to take on a romantic comedy in the short term. I haven't had time to invite other actresses before you appeared in front of me. I have to say, Nicole, you're very lucky." Nicole Kidman listened attentively to Eric's explanation, but her eyes didn't leave the script for a moment. After quickly flipping through it, the woman put the script back. She felt dizzy. "Eric, is this really for me?" "Of course. But your experience in Australia is completely useless in Hollywood, so you can only be considered a newcomer. Your salary is the same as when Julia took on Wind and Moon. $300,000, no bonus. As Nicole Kidman listened to Eric's explanation, she reached for the 2 contracts again. Eric stopped her. It's too late now. We should rest. Anyway, we still have a few months. You can take your time to read them. Just give me one of them after you've finished reading them and sign them. Hearing Eric's words, the woman lowered her head slightly. Then okay. Come with me. Eric stood up. The woman held the documents in her arms, took the windbreaker and suitcase, and led Eric upstairs. Eric led the woman to the 2nd floor and opened the door to an empty bedroom. This is your bedroom. The bedding is in the wardrobe. It's all new. Make do with it. If you're not satisfied, you can change it tomorrow. Well, thank you. The woman whispered. Eric briefly introduced the facilities in the room before saying, You should rest early. I'm going back to the bedroom. Eric turned and left, closing the bedroom door behind him. Nicole Kidman, who was standing in the room, was about to move when the door was pushed open again. The woman subconsciously shrank her neck, but soon relaxed. She lowered her hands and bit her lips, waiting for something to happen. Eric looked at the woman, who looked like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. He smiled and gestured in the air, explaining, Nicole, I just forgot the most important thing. I want to remind you that starting tomorrow, you have to start fulfilling your duties. I usually wake up at 7, so I don't want you to wake up later than me. Breakfast has to be ready before 8. I'm not picky in this regard. You can use the ingredients in the kitchen to make what you're best at. Dinner is the same. Cleaning the villa and the surroundings is also your job. You can decide how to clean it, as long as it's clean. The woman nodded nervously. Eric, I understand. Well, good night. Sleep early. Eric said as he closed the bedroom door again. Nicole heard the click of the door lock and sat down in exhaustion. She took a few quick breaths and stared at the door in a daze. After waiting for a few minutes and making sure that he wouldn't open the door again, the woman pulled the black windbreaker on the side and took out the tape recorder from the inside pocket. She pressed the stop button and looked at the documents on the table. The corners of her mouth twitched as if she wanted to smile, but she couldn't. After thinking about it, the woman rewound the tape, lowered the volume, and pressed the play button. Sound came out of the tape recorder. Although it wasn't very loud, it was enough to clearly distinguish every word of the conversation. Click. The door was suddenly pushed open again. Eric appeared at the door holding a pillow. Sorry, I think you need this. With a bang, the tape recorder fell to the floor. It bounced a few times, but it still stubbornly played the sound. Tom Hanks will play the role. As long as you pay attention to the entertainment news, you should know who Hanks is. The female lead could have been given to Julia Roberts. Eric's soft but clear voice echoed in the silent bedroom. Eric stared at the small object in a daze. Nicole didn't know how to react at all. She sat there with cold hands and feet. Her body trembled slightly, and her eyes were filled with despair and fear. Chapter 143. Seeing that Nicole Kidman was so frightened that she almost fainted, Eric walked in and threw the pillow in his hand over. He picked up the tape recorder on the ground and turned it off. Silly woman, don't you know how to lock the door after doing this kind of thing? I forgot. Next time. Next time. The woman was a little incoherent. Eric laughed out loud. You still want a next time? The woman recovered and quickly shook her head. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Eric stepped forward, lifted the woman's chin, and carefully stroked her beautiful face, as if he was admiring a delicate porcelain. In fact, what you did was useless. Even if I don't fulfill my promise and you give the recording to the media, it won't affect me too much. On the contrary, your acting career will be completely over. No movie will use a silly woman. I didn't want that. I just wanted to protect myself. Nicole weakly defended herself. I can understand, but I'm still very unhappy. What do you think I should do? Eric asked. The woman trembled and consciously reached for the buttons of her shirt. Eric stopped her. Forget it. Looking at you like this, I really can't get excited. Go to bed early. Don't forget what I told you before. After that, Eric threw down the radio and turned to leave the bedroom. Nicole sat in a daze for a long time before she got up and locked the bedroom door. She mechanically took out the bedding from the cabinet and laid it on the bed. She lay there, but couldn't fall asleep. Her thoughts were in a mess. Her life in Australia, her experience in the entertainment industry, the dissuasion of her relatives and friends when she came to Hollywood, her miserable experience in Hollywood for a few months, her several meetings with Eric, and her vision for the future. While she was lost in her thoughts, the sky outside the window began to light up. She looked at her watch. It was 6:30. Although the girl was beginning to feel sleepy, she still forced herself to wake up. She hung the simple clothes in the suitcase in the wardrobe and went to the bathroom to brush her teeth, wash her face, and put on makeup. After tidying herself up, she changed into a white shirt and jeans. She picked a pair of black flats to wear before opening the door and walking out. She didn't know where Eric's bedroom was. Even if she knew, she didn't dare to call him. She quietly walked downstairs, opened the door, and left the villa. The villa with high walls and green trees seemed very quiet. Standing by the empty swimming pool in front of the villa, she took a few deep breaths of the cool morning air. The tiredness from a sleepless night also dissipated a lot. She walked around the villa to familiarize herself with the environment before she walked into the villa again and went to the kitchen. Eric woke up on time at 7 o'clock. After going downstairs, he greeted the tall figure at the kitchen door and went to the gym to start the day's exercise. Half an hour later, Eric took a shower and changed his clothes. He took today's newspaper and sat in the living room until 8 o'clock. Then, he found that the woman seemed to still be busy, so he curiously walked into the kitchen. There were several kinds of food on the kitchen table. Sandwiches, sweet soup, steak, salad, and the woman seemed to be making fried eggs. Nicole, that's enough. We can't finish these. Eric picked up a sandwich and took a bite. The woman turned off the gas, scooped out the fried eggs and explained, I don't know what you like to eat, so I made more. I said, anything is fine. I'm not picky in this regard. The two brought breakfast to the dining room together. The woman stood hesitantly next to Eric, as if she was very into the role of a maid. Eric couldn't help but laugh. Sit down and eat together. I don't plan to pay you a salary, so you don't have to be so dedicated. Okay, thank you. When Nicole heard Eric's words, she obediently sat down on the opposite side of the table. So this somewhat strange life officially began after this breakfast. After breakfast, Nicole watched Eric drive away before returning to her bedroom. She began to carefully read the documents from last night, especially the actor contract for Sleepless in Seattle. She read it over and over again many times, but she didn't find anything wrong with it. Although Eric told her not to leave the mansion as much as possible to prevent paparazzi from taking photos and causing a scandal, the woman still sneaked out this morning and found a law firm. She spent a few $100s to ask a professional lawyer to help check whether the contract was legally valid. After the lawyer confirmed that there were no problems, she was completely relieved. When Eric returned home in the afternoon, he found that Nicole seemed to be a completely different person. The original uneasiness on her face had completely disappeared, and there was a flattering smile on her face. The villa seemed to have been cleaned and looked brand new. Nicole took a few bags from Eric's hand and asked, Eric, do you want to put them in your bedroom? Eric shook his head. No, these are yours. Go upstairs and pick one for me to see. For me. The woman opened a clothing bag and looked inside. She found a set of black and white clothes with beautiful lace. She asked curiously, Are these pajamas? No, you'll know when you change into them in your room. Oh. The girl nodded her head obediently and went upstairs with several bags in her hands. Eric sat down on the sofa and picked up the remote control to turn on the TV. After waiting for half an hour, he heard the sound of leather boots stepping on the stairs. There seemed to be hesitation in the footsteps. When he turned his head and saw Nicole's figure completely appear, Eric instantly lowered his head and covered his forehead. God, it's so ugly. How could he forget about this? Nicole was a little dissatisfied, so it took her half an hour to persuade herself to change into it. If it was a normal uniform, the woman wouldn't have resisted too much. It wasn't that she hadn't seen it before. However, this set of clothes was very different from the ones she had seen before. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but this set of clothes was obviously one size smaller. Seeing Eric's action of holding his forehead, the girl's unhappiness inexplicably turned into apprehension. She lowered her head and carefully examined it. Seeing that there was nothing wrong with the way he wore it, she couldn't help but ask, "Eric, is there a problem?" Eric still lowered his head and waved at the woman in disdain. Go. Change back first. We'll go out and help you clean up later." Chapter 144. 2 hours later, in a hair salon in Beverly Hills, Nicole looked at her new image in the mirror. Only then did she understand why Eric disliked her. The woman in the mirror was a completely different person from before. If her previous image was that of a woman with some beauty, now she was a glamorous modern woman. In the mirror, the girl's hair had been dyed a beautiful golden brown. Her originally rustic fluffy curly hair had been straightened, and there was a bunch of slanted bangs on her forehead. This hairstyle made the girl look more mature and intellectual. "Miss, compared to your previous hairstyle, this hairstyle makes you look even more classy. Your boyfriend really has good taste." The hairdresser stood behind Nicole and gave her the final touches as she praised her. "He's not." Nicole softly opened her mouth and wanted to defend herself. She glanced at the figure behind her, who was wearing sunglasses and flipping through a magazine in the lounge. She stopped herself. If only he was really her boyfriend. But now, she felt like she was more like a Barbie, allowing that hateful guy to dress her up according to his preferences. So, even though she looked a lot prettier, she wasn't too excited in her heart. "Sir, do you think it's okay?" After everything was done, the woman got up and walked towards Eric. The hairdresser followed behind Nicole. She looked at the somewhat familiar man in sunglasses and asked. Eric raised his head and looked at Nicole. He nodded at the hairdresser. The woman's hairstyle was according to Eric's memory of the hairstyle in the movie Translation Crisis. In his memory, there were many movies about Nicole Kidman, and Eric's favorite was the woman's hairstyle in Translation Crisis. She was intellectual and beautiful, strong and sensitive. In Translation Crisis, after a tragic explosion, the woman played Sylvia. She had a scar on her cheek from shrapnel. She wore a professional suit and walked down the stairs with a backpack. This scene left a deep impression on Eric. If it wasn't for the fact that Nicole's temperament in this scene was very similar to Meg Ryan's when she stood across the road and looked at Tom Hanks in Sleepless in Seattle, Eric wouldn't have given her the female lead role in Sleepless in Seattle. Thinking of Sylvia in Translation Crisis, Eric looked at the woman's left cheek, although there was no scar there. Many classic characters were always deeply engraved in the hearts of viewers. The hairdresser mistook Eric's action for intimacy between lovers. She chuckled and pushed him away. "Eric, what's wrong?" Nicole's woman intuition made her ask. Eric said, "Nothing. But I think." The woman raised her hand and gestured, but she didn't know how to describe the feeling she just had. "You're right." Eric looked the woman up and down and said, "You could be Nicole Kidman or Sylvia Bloom, or Grace Stewart, Gillian Owen, Alice Hafford, Ada Monroe, or Virginia Woolf." "I don't understand." The woman shook her head in confusion. "Okay, let's go." Eric didn't explain. He called the waiter over and handed over his credit card. After paying the bill, they left. Nicole wanted to pay the bill herself, but Eric reached out and stopped her. After finding another restaurant for dinner, Eric took the woman back. On the way back, Nicole was silent. When they entered the villa's living room again, the woman whispered, "Eric, do you want me to put it on again and show it to you?" Eric sat down on the sofa and said, "No need. We'll have time in the future. You must have read the contract today, right? Have you made a decision?" Nicole nodded guiltily and ran upstairs to take down the 2 signed contracts. Eric looked at the woman's signature and found a pen to sign as well. He handed one of the contracts to the woman and said, "Prepare the script well." After Eric finished speaking, he didn't chat with the woman for too long. and went upstairs to the study. He had to finish the script for Friends. Jeffrey and John Aniston had also suggested forming a screenwriting team to be responsible for writing the script for Friends. Eric only needed to provide the outline of the story. However, Eric didn't accept this suggestion. Although this was a common practice for all television series, Eric decided to write all the scripts for the first season himself in order to ensure the original flavor of the show. After all, no matter how good a screenwriter was, it was impossible to fully understand Eric's intentions. Only Eric, who had all the images in his mind, had the ability to copy them completely. Moreover, Eric also planned to make appropriate changes to the first season based on some classic scenes in his memory to make this season even better. In his memory, the second season of Friends had the best ratings. Other than the occasional guest stars, the most important thing was that the script for the second season was very good. Coincidentally, Eric had watched the complete first 2 seasons, so he made up his mind to completely integrate the content of the 2 seasons and create a brand new Friends that was completely in line with the flavor of his previous life. Anyway, according to the rules of American television series, as long as the first season was successful, the ratings would be guaranteed. He just needed to spend more time on the script. This series was also a very important experiment for Eric and Firefly. If they could make a name for themselves with Friends, then they wouldn't have to worry about not being able to sell other American television series in the future. The market for American television series was actually not much smaller than the movie market, but because the market was very closed, it was very quiet. If they could successfully break into this circle, Eric would be able to convert the classic scenes in his memory into real wealth. The typewriter in the study had been replaced with the latest IBM personal computer. Although the text editing software was still very backward compared to his previous life, and the operation was also quite complicated, it was still much more convenient than a typewriter. Eric also felt like he was in an office in his previous life in front of a laptop. From time to time, the sound of rapid typing on the keyboard could be heard in the study. Every time he wrote a paragraph, Eric would pause and ponder for a while. Combining the content of 2 seasons was not an easy task. Many times, Eric had the impulse to directly copy the first season of the original version. It couldn't be helped. Humans were all lazy. Nicole knocked on the door of the study with a tray in her hand. After getting permission, she walked in and gently placed the coffee pot and coffee cup on the table. When she saw Eric staring at the monitor intently, she started to look around the spacious study. During the day, she wanted to come in and take a look. She didn't have any other intentions, just purely out of curiosity. Unfortunately, this room was not like other rooms that could be opened with a push. Even Drew's bedroom was the same. Nicole even saw a picture of Drew and Eric placed in Drew's room. However, this room was an exception. She guessed that Eric was the only one who had the key to this room. The most eye-catching thing in the study was still the large writing board, and the black piano that didn't fit in with the messy style of the study. The writing board was densely covered with A4 papers. Some of them were rough scripts. Some were paragraphs of text, some were scattered lines that she couldn't understand at all, and some were written in square characters. Nicole had seen them in Chinatown before. They should be Chinese characters, which was said to be one of the most difficult languages in the world to learn. As if she was inexplicably attracted, the girl walked forward and carefully looked at the manuscripts. She even took a piece of A4 paper with Chinese characters and carefully studied it for a while. Of course, she couldn't understand it, but she could tell that the Chinese characters were handwritten. Although she didn't understand what it meant, it looked very beautiful and had a kind of elegant beauty. Nicole carefully put the A4 paper back on the writing board. She couldn't help but look back at Eric, who was still typing rapidly on the keyboard. This man was really a mystery. It was said that he was less than 19 years old, but he knew so much. Not only was he a director, he was also an actor, a screenwriter, and had published 2 best-selling novels. And in this study, Nicole found that he definitely knew how to draw and play music. He could write those beautiful and mysterious hieroglyphs. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was overflowing with talent. More importantly, he was so rich. It was said that he had a net worth of hundreds of millions of dollars. Women always admired the strong. This was an instinct that was engraved in the depths of their genes during the hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Nicole, who was thinking about all this in her mind, unconsciously fell into a certain mood. Not far away, Eric's every move was becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. If Eric turned his head and saw the girl's expression, based on his experience in his previous life, he would definitely tease her. "Girl, why are you so love-struck?" Unfortunately, he didn't notice any of this. He was so immersed in the idea of the script of Friends that he didn't even take a sip of the coffee that Nicole brought in. The girl silently looked at the back of the working figure for a while. After she came back to her senses, she also noticed that she was acting strangely. Her cheeks unconsciously flushed with a hint of redness. She lifted her feet and walked towards the piano in the corner. Her slender white fingers slid across the black paint. She took a handwritten music score from the piano cover and looked at it. "Don't tell me he wrote this himself?" The girl stared at the strings of small tadpoles. Although she couldn't understand them, she had a very strong feeling. Her fingers unconsciously stroked the black and white piano keys and completely unconsciously pressed them. Ding ding dong dong. A series of crisp sounds in the originally quiet study woke Eric up from his idea of the script. You're tuning into the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.